Oh, good.
Seeing a quorum of voting members, I call the February 24th Cincinnati School Board meeting to order. Do it that way. I know. Be a little louder. There we go. Seeing a quorum of voting members, I call the February 24th Cincinnati School Board meeting to order. Treasurer Wagner, take the roll call. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. Mr. Craig?
Here.
Mr. Crossett?
Here.
Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Ms. Mapp? Mrs. Weinberg? Vice President Bolton?
Present.
President Moffitt?
Here. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our wonderful students leading us in the virtual pledge.
Absolutely. Today, we have the students from Westwood School, where their principal is Mr. Chris Grant.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Vice President Bolton, please explain the virtual hearing of the public.
Thank you very much. Members of the public who are online and wish to speak during the hearing of the public this evening may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your requests for 5 minutes. If you would like a direct response to your questions, please make sure to share your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will call for a motion to revise the current agenda and add a resolution to appoint a new treasurer. Is there first and second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Do we vote on that?
Discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry, discussion.
Is there going to be a separate vote to approve the rest of the agenda?
Yes.
After this is done, we're going to vote again to approve the rest of the agenda. Great. I have no discussion.
I think I understand, Board Member Lindy. We're going to vote on the revision, and then we're going to vote to approve the agenda, or do we do it all in one? Correct. Yes. Okay, so we're going to just do it once.
Okay, then this is super quick. We were corresponding, thank you, about the recommendation that Mr. Crossett and I have with Superintendent Murphy for that final part of her evaluation tool. I think we can do that tonight very quickly because the three of us, I think, are presenting a united recommendation. And I was going to ask that we could put that on the agenda tonight. I think given its importance, I'd love to do it early, but maybe after hearing of the public. But I do think this can be much shorter than any of our prior discussions on evaluation.
So are you suggesting to add that maybe under?
Maybe just right before presentations, 5 minutes.
Okay.
Get it done, and then
do
we
that.
can move on to the rest of our scheduled programming.
Sure.
I'm sorry, could you state the topic?
Superintendent's evaluation.
So that would be 6A. I'm just clarifying.
It would be
Well, he's-
between 4 and 5.
He's wanting to do that. I'm just going to make it a 3A. We'll just do that right after the resolution.
3A. Got it.
You just tell me and I will make it very quick. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Ready?
Treasurer Wagner.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffitt?
Yes. Tonight's agenda is approved as revised. So we have a resolution to appoint a new treasurer. Mr. Craig and Mr. Crossett, would you please present the resolution appointing a new treasurer?
All righty. So I will read it here. I am presenting a resolution appointing Michael Guston, treasurer of the Cincinnati City School District. Whereas treasurer, CFO Jennifer Wagner recently announced her retirement in 2025. The Board of Education recognizes and appreciates Ms. Wagner's service to the Cincinnati Public Schools, and Whereas the Board of Education retained the services of the Ohio School Board Association to assist with a search for a treasurer to succeed Ms. Wagner, the board received applications from numerous candidates, including accomplished treasurers and school administrators at other districts. The board conducted interviews with the strongest candidates and arranged for the finalists to meet other district employees and stakeholders. And whereas the board is grateful for everyone involved in this process, including other candidates who applied for the position, the board is confident that the search has led the board to select the best candidate to become the district's new treasurer and CFO. Be it further resolved that the Cincinnati Board of Education resolves to appoint Michael Guston as the district's next treasurer and CFO effective September 1st, 2025. The board authorizes the superintendent to offer a contract of employment to Mr. Guston to be approved by the board at the earliest opportunity. So I submit this resolution and hope for a second and support.
Second?
Any discussion by board members? Yes.
I just want to specifically call out and thank all the folks, some of our various union stakeholders, as well as our audit committee members and other staff who helped participate and gave their feedback, and all of the candidates who applied for the position. I think when we set out on this journey to try and figure out who would be our next treasurer, it was this question mark of like, how many people in the state of Ohio even can be a treasurer, let alone who would then apply. And we had some really amazing folks who applied for the position and really amazing folks who we've interviewed. And I just want to thank everybody who's participated, as well as specifically Quinn, who has shepherded us from OSBA through this process and made sure we stay on task and on the target. And so, again, I'm really excited of our new selection here, and I look forward to working more with Mike in that capacity. But I think it's also just really important to thank all of the folks who participated and helped along the way in helping us make this decision.
Board Member Crossett.
Yes, in addition to the thank you that Brandon expressed to all the people that helped us, I also want to thank Brandon for his leadership in guiding this search. Good job. Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything else? So, Vice President Bolton?
I really appreciate the fact that we have been able to make this decision and have great confidence in the decision that we made, and feel very good about the future within the treasurer's office and the treasury itself.
Treasurer Wagner.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm actually very thrilled. I think you made a wise choice. Mike and I have worked together for 10 years, and he's gonna be better than I ever thought of being. So, good job.
Going last, I will say that we had two really great candidates. I'm so proud that we decided to stay within homegrown, and we have full trust in Mr. Guston and for the leadership that he's been under. Thank you, Jen, Treasurer Wagner. And we're looking forward to some amazing things in helping us remain fiscally transparent and fiscally responsible. Unfortunately, it's a daunting task. School funding is not sexy, but we're willing to definitely work together. Treasurer Wagner, would you call?
I'm not going to be the only board member who doesn't say anything. I just wanted to say, Mike, really enjoyed your interview. Thought you did a really good job. Excited to work together. And I think it was clear in some of the feedback that we got from some of the groups, what a nice job you've done building relationships with other people in the organization. So excited you're here. Lots to do. Congratulations.
Does anyone else have anything to say? Treasurer Wagner, would you call a vote?
Tearing up here. Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. We finally made Treasurer Wagner cry. Board Member Lindy, oh, I'm sorry, wait. What are we doing? I didn't know if we were doing something else. Board Member Lindy, would you provide an update on the Superintendent Evaluation Scoring Committee meeting?
I will, thank you. We are not a formal committee. We are just two board members who volunteered after our last board meeting, or during our last board meeting. But the last step, I think, in getting so we passed an important set of updates in December to the eval policy. They are good. We're in a weird year because we had a superintendent start in the middle of it. So we have been working hard to try to put in place the parts of the eval policy that we can in this first year in a way that makes sense. I appreciated the draft of the tool that Mr. Crossett created. We met together. I think there was a healthy exchange between all three of us with some things changing, some things not changing. And Superintendent, I just wanted to just check with you that collaboration is an important part of this policy. And so this is a good one if and only if it's built with your recommendations in it. Do you feel like that's true of this recommendation we're making?
Most definitely, and appreciate the efforts and energy and time of both of you, Mr. Lindy, Mr. Crossett. Thank you.
That's great. There really is very little that changed from the draft that Mr. Crossett presented. I think we made sure that there was a target for this year for each of the goals. And I think we changed it from having 2 mid-year reviews to just 1, given that it is late February. Other than that, I think it's basically the same. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay.
And it's, it could be a tool that's structured that could be used in future years. It may not need a whole lot of tweaking as we go forward, but we'll see.
That's great. I don't know that other board members have seen it.
I think we presented it or passed it out with the original.
At the last meeting, and
Yeah.
folks can just
When
know
we
that
talked about the policy, yeah.
the only changes are we got rid of the second mid-year review, given the time of the year that we're in, and we made sure that there was a aligned target for this school year for all of the different goals, and I think that's it.
Right. And that was only one goal.
There's only one that changed, yeah.
Great, so my ask would just be, I love the report, but could you just put it in writing and email it to the board members? Like, just email what you've shared. If there's a change to it and we already have it, just put it in writing.
That's great. Mr. Crossett, I think, has the last version of it. Would you mind sharing it with people?
Will do.
Thank you.
And from a process standpoint, the policy does require us to take a vote to approve it. And so I think we should do that. But I do want people to be able to see it. And I also want the superintendent to have clarity because there's not that much school year left. I think one way to do that is we could come back to it later this meeting if people want to peek at it while we're here, or we could do it on Monday. I'm sensitive to the superintendent, and that would put her in March.
I'm going to suggest Monday. The reason being is because we have 2 board members that are not here. I've not seen it, and I can't guarantee I'm going to look at it during this meeting. So I think to be fair and to be able to do it with fidelity, let's just put it on the agenda for March the 3rd. And then everyone will be able to have seen it. Send us an email, and everyone will check their emails, and then we'll get back with any questions. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that spreadsheets make your eyes glaze over?
They're just not sexy. They're just not sexy. So, Vice President
Yeah,
Bolton.
I think that makes sense to do March 3rd, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it through the policy committee and Mr. Lindy's leadership on that particularly, and then the scoring piece. I do have the continuing question about the 60% and 10% piece. Is that figured into, I know it's not part of the scoring sheet, but where are we on the 60-10 or 50-10 or whatever? And then also the ability to indeed write commentary, or are we the scoring sheet alone? Where is the status of that for the evaluation?
So the scoring sheet reflects the policy. So it does have a 60%, 10%, 30% categories. The 10% is not related to results. It's related to whether we're checking in with the superintendent. So and then the 30% is related to the state standards. And I can walk you through it to help you.
Yeah, and I'd appreciate that,
Sure.
but that does mean that 70% of the superintendent's evaluation will be on student results.
That is incorrect. Only 60%. The 10% is not on results. It's on whether or not we have good check-in meetings with the superintendent during the year. It's
So
not
it
on the results.
isn't a 70-30, it's a 60-40.
That is correct.
Is that,
That's right, and I think this is a bitter point to Dr. Moffat's point about doing it Monday. People should
Right.
read this. Maybe if Mr. Crossett and Ms. Bolden could connect on, or I can, I just
I'm
think that he
happy.
wrote it.
I'm
And
very
so
happy
I
right
want to make
now.
sure it,
the only thing
Feels
that
good.
has not been answered is the commentary, but we can talk about that on Monday.
yeah.
Thank you.
So we will put this on the agenda for Monday. Board members, if you have any questions,
Great.
check your emails throughout the week so that we can field those questions. Superintendent Murphy, let's see, do any board members have any acknowledgements or announcements? Board Member Craig.
So I just wanted to call out, because I didn't do it before. We had the regional ethics bowl, high school ethics bowl competition, so a few weeks ago. 2 weeks ago was or 2 weekends ago, I really should say like a week and a half ago, was the divisional round. And so while I don't have the results because they wouldn't let me know about it, I know that we were represented by Walnut at the divisional high school ethics bowl competition, and that puts us against other schools from across the country. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the folks at Walnut Hills. I also wanted to shout out specifically, there's a specific student, and I am blanking on her name, but who is now at UC, who was an ethics bowl competitor, who will be actually assisting with one of our schools. So we expand to an additional school into the competition next year. But I think it's a really great sign to see one of our students coming back to the district to help give an experience to other students that she got while she was a student. So it's, again, a great sign of what our students will do to support each other and to support our district.
Great. Anything else? I will share that I had an opportunity to attend Dr. Rudnick's CPS choir. It's all of the artists from all of our schools, the choir, and they had a wonderful presentation, and the strings from at Hughes last week, and it was awesome. I do have on Facebook some of the snippets from the performance, but they just were awesome. And it was interesting because the students were in the audience cheering on their teachers, and it was just a great, great performance. So thank you to all of them. I did tell them I was going to post this, but it really doesn't do much justice if you can't hear it because they really, really, really performed well. So thank you for the invitation and for a wonderful performance. Board Member Weinberg asked me to share about the Women in Sports Conference that was held here by the district on February the 11th, and she shared kudos to Josh Harden and his team for a successful Women in Sports Conference. Here's some more outstanding pictures. And they had a wonderful panel of women in the sports industry with student input. And then, does she have one more? Was that it? Okay. The only other thing is that her and I both attended, and she was supposed to sit in a picture for the readathon at Fairview, along with, there we go, the Red Legs. She read her book, or she had a reader, and then I read one of my favorite books, which was Corduroy, and Ms. Weinberg read her book that she has published, and so thank you to them for having us out. It was a great time. I think that's concluding all of our announcements. Superintendent Murphy.
Yes, thank you so much. We do have one certificated member of our staff who's planning to retire. Longtime principal at Mount Airy School, Angel Roddy. And then by way of announcements, I think General Counsel Hoying is going to prepare to come to do a little special presentation. But while he's making his way, also in the General Counsel's office, we have a special kudos to Stephanie Scott. She's our Assistant General Counsel member, and there should be a slide on this one. She was recently recognized by the YMCA as a Black History Month Spotlight. Congratulations to Stephanie Scott. And then on the next slide, I too, my picture was a little more busy. So anyway, congratulations again. Josh Harden works so hard and his entire team. Also a highlight about the Girls and Women in Sports Conference where our Vice President, our Board Member Weinberg was a participant. And the other thing, as General Counsel comes in celebration of Black History Month, again, to Josh Harden, we talked early in the school year about the possibility of partnering with Black-owned clothing store. And you, board members, have on the back of your chairs our Black History Month shirt that we are selling to the public. And we hope that you will enjoy your t-shirt this year. Dan.
I prepared this a couple of years ago during February for our leadership team, and this year the superintendent asked me to share it with principals, which I did last week, and to share it with you. So I'm a student of CPS history. I really enjoy reading about it and learning about our history. And this slide deck highlights the school district's history in educating Black students. A qualification before I start, I'm very well aware that there are others in this room who have far more knowledge about this subject than I do, and I consider this just sort of an evolving project that I welcome your feedback, and I don't know, I'm very, very proud to do it. So just for some background, Ohio was founded as a part of was settled as a part of the Northwest Territory. So in 1787, even before the US Constitution was passed in Philadelphia, a group mostly from New England, went to New York to have the Northwest Ordinance passed. And the Northwest Territory consisted of Ohio and Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And the ordinance was the sort of governing document for that big new section of the country. And two of the really important things about the Northwest Ordinance are, one, that it banned slavery at a time when slavery was not banned in most of the fledgling country, and two, that it was that education would be highlighted and really important in the new territory. And so Northwest Ordinance, Ohio is founded on these very high-minded principles, kind of Puritan principles. And so, just 15 years later, when Ohio was founded as a state with the first constitution in 1803, again, high-minded principles about education, banning slavery, and that's how the state was founded. We know, though, within just a few years after Ohio was founded as a state, the legislature is passing what were called the Black Laws, which were prohibitions, and it made it very difficult, if not impossible, for free Blacks from the South to move up and settle in these new Ohio towns. Required Black people to register with the clerk of court, pay a bond of good behavior. They weren't allowed to participate in the court system or the school system. So notwithstanding the sort of high-minded ideals of the state, just within a few years after the state is founded, there's already discriminatory legislation being passed. A little bit more history. So again, 1825, Ohio allows the first property tax to support public schools. And that's about the time that our schools are being founded. 1827 is when William Woodward and Abigail Cutter donated land for the building of Woodward, the first real school within Cincinnati Public Schools. The Hughes gift was 1824, but his school was not built until 1851. But there are schools, public schools being built at this time for the benefit of poor children, not for the benefit of Black children. Black students weren't admitted to these schools, and so Black business owners were coming up with their own, paying property taxes, of course, but coming up with their own funds to build schools for Black children. Next slide. So 1852 is when Reverend Dangerfield Early was the first, he founded the first sort of home school for black students in Walnut Hills. Some of the heroes of this time, Peter Clark is the first black teacher in Cincinnati, namesake, of course, of Clark Montessori. And by 1872, Early's little home school is far outgrown its utility. And so there's a new building built on Elm Street, the current Alms Place location, current site of Odell Owen School, where a large and important building for educating black students in Walnut Hills was built. It's a few blocks away from where the Cincinnati Common School was educating white students. That's the building on the corner of William Howard Taft and Melrose, which is still there. I think it's a Doane school now, but it's still there. That was built in 1871. And so the 1872 school was a really big deal. There was a separate school board for the black schools at that time, but there were some really important people on that board. Joseph Early, that's the son of Dangerfield Early, was one of the board members. William Hartwell Parham was a teacher, principal, and later left education at the age of 49 to become the first black graduate of Cincinnati College of Law and elected to the Ohio House of Representatives. We had a school named after Mr. Parham in Evanston. It became, I think, Evanston with the merging of Parham and Hoffman schools, that's right. So he was an important guy. And then Robert Gordon was the third board member. He was born into slavery, but learned to trade and became a coal dealer in Cincinnati. He actually sold the bricks to the Cincinnati board to build the school. He was on the board and sold the bricks. That would be a conflict of interest at this point, but at the time that was pretty common, I guess. All of this sets up, 1887, the black laws are pretty much eliminated. Legal desegregation was prohibited in Ohio by 1887. And that sets up just what I think of as really a golden age for the school district at the beginning of the century. So my favorite period of time is this period from 1910 to 1915. Within those times, this is like the first FMP for the school district, because 1910, the new Woodward building is built on 1310 Sycamore Street, the one that's still there and is lofts now. 1913, Dr. John Withrow opens his school in Hyde Park, purchasing land from the estate of Andrew Erkenbrecher, founder of the Cincinnati Zoo. And then two major schools to educate black students were constructed in this same 1910 to 1915. The first is the Frederick Douglass School. That was built in Walnut Hills, same site as where the Elm Street School, the Alms Place location. This is a brand new building constructed in 1911. It's state of the art, 19 classrooms, a 350-seat auditorium. It also receives a new name, the Frederick Douglass School, specifically holding itself out for the education of black students. And the philosophy that they followed at the Frederick Douglass School was part of the same as W.E.B. Du Bois. So it was all about academic excellence. It was an argument that social change could be accomplished by developing a small group of college-educated blacks. Du Bois referred to this as the talented 10th. This was going to be the elites of our society, essentially. And that's what's going on in Walnut Hills at the Frederick Douglass School. Across town in the West End, Jenny Porter, future namesake of the Hayes Porter School, founds the Harriet Beecher Stowe School. She's got a very different philosophy. Her philosophy is she's reaching out to the poor migrant black families in the city. And she's following the sort of credo of Booker T. Washington to teach a trade to students. And so within this brand new Harriet Beecher Stowe School, also you can still see the Harriet Beecher Stowe School. It's a Spanish colonial building on 7th Street. It's a current site of Fox 19's headquarters. ABC has its offices in what was the Harriet Beecher Stowe School, built in 1914, this same period. Again, sewing shop, print shop, they've got a farm in College Hill where they're teaching kids agricultural arts, and she was all about, again, this sort of Booker T. Washington model of building up black wealth over generations, but she was roundly criticized as a segregationist. I think her nickname was Jubilee Jenny. She was criticized by the black community as a segregationist, essentially. And she was criticized, that brings me to the third and last, by the founder of the NAACP, Wendell Dobney, who has his own theory about how black students should be educated, and he was an integrationist. He thought that we have, in the late 1880s, they banned the black laws. Our kids should be attending the same schools as white kids. And so what I love about this age is, at least I think of all these folks as, having a bona fide, belief in the education of black students and the lifting up of black citizens in our city. But they have three really different views on how that should be done. Either the sort of creating an elite class at the Douglas School, a sort of generational wealth through trades and things like that at the Harriet Beecher Stowe School, and then Dobney, who wants kids to go to school together. And they were starting to go to school together. That's the presentation. I find it to be a really fascinating part of time. Obviously, the history goes on, and segregation in Cincinnati public schools did not end, of course. There was the Bronson desegregation litigation in the 70s and 80s led by Marion Spencer. But I think it's relevant because it shows that CPS has a history of striving to educate all the kids in our city. And I'm very proud to be a part of that. I know we have different philosophies sometimes and different ways that we think we should go about it, but always striving to educate all the students in our city. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, Dan, you left, but board members, do you have any questions, comments? Board Member Craig.
I would just say, thank you again, Dan, for doing the presentation. I think it's important to remember, especially in this era that we are currently living in, the necessity to recognize and appreciate the challenges that got us to where we are today, and the folks who along that pathway open new doors, open new places. I think it's an interesting experience for me. At one point, several years ago, a friend of mine and I went and looked up all the names of who were on our buildings in CPS that we could remember to try and figure out who some of these folks were, because it's not something we teach in class. It's not something we cover on a regular basis a lot of times. And so you started learning about different people's names and different people's experiences and the things that they did to give back and the spaces they gave and the land that was, how the city developed and how the city expanded from downtown up. And how this became part of that journey is we created new spaces, we went to new places. So I appreciate, the presentation. And I want to also just say, I feel this kind of way that we sometimes get lost in this thought that the journey to fully integrating and fully moving everybody into the process has ended. It hasn't. There's so many of our students who today do not get to experience the world the way everyone else that they're friends with do. They don't get to experience the world in the way that I might or that the rest of us will. And I think it's really important that we say something to them in this time where they may feel left out, they may feel lost, they may feel left behind, that we care. There's a lot of stuff happening, especially in our state right now, that is not going to be helpful to those students, especially our LGBTQ students, but to our students who are facing their own personal family issues. There are things that are going on in the globe that really affect them. We should be a district that they always remember cared, that their teachers care, that our parents care, that our administration cares, that this board cares. It's part of the reason the board passed an equity policy. It's part of the reason the board constantly is striving to make sure that we give experiences to those students. But it's important to just say sometimes we care. So I really appreciate the presentation, Dan, and it really gives us an opportunity to say how much we care in this time.
Thank you. Vice President Bolton?
Yes, thank you for the presentation, and I too share the love of this district's history, which is legendary and actually leads the nation in many, many ways. And nothing is more important in American history, maybe except the Emancipation Proclamation, than the Northwest Ordinance. It's the most liberal, most radical thing we ever passed. And of course, after they had a chance to deal with it, the state legislature in Ohio kind of ruined it, but what's new? But I would suggest on this that the reference throughout this is that we will be having a bicentennial, and we can choose which year we want to use. And I think right now we're choosing 1827 as the beginning, sort of, but we could choose other dates as well. And I think many months ago, when folks from Walnut Hills came in, they made a very strong case about the history of Douglas School and the presence of keeping a CPS school in Walnut Hills. And I would say about the Douglas School, some research that I've been able to do over time is the Douglas School that you point out actually probably was the first community learning center, because it offered not only the schooling experience, but it offered all sorts of services for families and for students and neighbors, including medical services, including nutrition and what have you. So again, that's a long time history here for us as well. But Dan, it means a lot to all of us to have you do this. And we should, as Brandon mentioned, when you do, and I did it once before, I think for the board, you look at even the names that our schools carry now. When we looked at that, we initially looked at it because other places were finding out that the people whose names were on their buildings maybe were suspect. But we went through all of ours, and each one of them was a trailblazer. Each one of them had something to improve the community. So we have a great history here, and we're the oldest district that we have on this side of the Alleghenies. And we lead, we don't follow. So thanks, this is great, Dan. Thanks for doing it.
Board Member Lundy.
Thanks. I can be very brief. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated this presentation and how much I also like this history. And I think it can be important and powerful to think of the work that, whether it's as a teacher or a building principal or a superintendent or a school board member, to feel like that work is part of a longer history and that we are writing its next chapter. And that this history has good parts and it has bad parts. And it is an ongoing battle to see whether our better angels are going to win. And we have lots of opportunities in the coming weeks and months to do that together. So thank you, and I appreciate it.
I'll just add, thank you, Dan, for this. I really wish that this in some form could be maybe on our website so that people could look at this. Dan's like, oh, here she goes again. But I think that there is such value in the information that you provided, not only for the historical reference of the people that are named, but the time period is also significant. I would also share, my mom lived, she's not that old, I won't tell you her age, but she remembers segregation. She remembers not being able to go to Coney Island because they wouldn't let Black people in. She remembers a sit-in at Aiken High School in order to teach Black history, and she talks about that often. And so some of you, you didn't mention it, but Marion Spencer was on this slide as well. And there are people who were trailblazers for Cincinnati Public, for our city, who are living, walking, talking history books. And it would be really, really great to have this on the website, or at least accessible to students, so that they could know that the schools that they go to have pride. They come from something. These people lived and worked and lived in Cincinnati and did everything that they did so that they could have what they have right now. And so I used to tell my son, if I'm getting on your nerves, read a book, because that'll take you someplace else. But this history might be what the kids need to kind of help them as well. So I invite you to put this on the website in some capacity, send it around so that our students can benefit. Thank you so much for the presentation. Moving on, Vice President
Dr. Moffitt, can I just
yes,
quickly,
ma'am.
just really quickly tell you, thank you for allowing us to do this on the agenda after it was already published. We didn't want to miss the opportunity, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being insistent. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Vice President Bolton, the chair is yours to please conduct the hearing of the public.
Thank you very much. We are now at the item on our agenda for hearing the public. Each speaker will have 2 minutes and will address all comments to the presiding officer. If you're online, once a request to speak has been granted, you'll be invited to enter. You should click on the camera icon to go interactive. Provide your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you'd like to have a response or of any question you may have. This request is consistent with the board protocol, and we appreciate your help. In the unusual event that someone is not willing to follow this protocol, we reserve the right to end that person's time. Again, each person will have 2 minutes to speak. When the timer goes off, your time is up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel matters. After speaking, if you're online, you'll briefly see a welcome screen again as you transition back to the live stream meeting. Finally, we ask that your public commentary be respectful of all listeners. Thank you very much. And tonight we have 2 in person. Do we have anyone online, Rob?
Madam Chair, we have 2.
Let's start with the online folks, if we could.
Thank you. Our first speaker tonight will be Sally Grimes, ABC. Sally, you can unmute your microphone and I will start your video.
Thank you, Rob. Looks like it's asking me to start my video. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Sally Grimes, and I am the Executive Director of Activities Beyond the Classroom, or ABC. I am here tonight to enthusiastically invite everybody who is listening to experience the vibrant sounds of jazz at the 5th Annual CPS Jazz Festival, 7 p.m. on Saturday, March 8th at the Aronoff Center for Performing Arts. This free event showcases the incredible talents of over 170 CPS children from throughout the entire district. They've been practicing their hearts out all year in preparation of putting on a fantastic show for you. Children will be on stage with 2 guest artists, acclaimed jazz musicians Camille Thurman and Tanya Darby, and will feature the world premiere of an exciting new jazz composition written by our very own Dr. Isidore Rudnick. Please join us to help cheer for and celebrate our amazing student musicians at this free event. I look forward to seeing you there, March 8th, 7 p.m. at the Aronoff. For more information, visit our website at abccincy.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. Our next and last online speaker will be Herschel Daniels. Herschel, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone and I will unmute your video. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank that presentation for CPS. I'm a member of the National Business League, which is Booker T. Washington's organization. We had the 124th meeting from 1900 last year. And this year, we hope to feature the work in Cincinnati at the 125th annual meeting of the Booker T. Washington's organization, the National Business League. Specifically, I want to thank the Superintendent's Investigative Committee in our proposal, and that we're looking forward in the coming week or weeks to follow up on it, and especially in light of the Dear Colleague letter that was issued by the United States Department of Education Office of Civil Rights on February 14th, talking about DEIA in terms of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You should know our proposal was structured to meet this letter that we expected to come from day one of the Trump administration, which canceled Executive Order 13985. Again, Cincinnati Public Schools, we look forward to working with you to set a model for the nation's 17,000 public school systems to meet the challenge that has been made for America's education in the 21st century. And we look forward to working with you, with our groups of who are coming to the table as we give an explanation of the financial process that is in, and we're glad that you have a new treasurer that we look forward to working with him and you to advance education in Cincinnati to create 21st century graduates so that 97% of the students can graduate.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. That is time.
Okay, so thank you.
And now we have 2 in-person speakers. We'll start with Mona Jenkins, And then we will have President Julie Sellers. Ms. Jenkins is coming to the podium. Good evening.
I'm Mona Jenkins, and I am a resident of Walnut Hills at 410 Knight. Since I do not have authorization to speak on behalf of the leadership roles that I hold. I, too, Dan, want to thank you for that presentation and the highlights of Frederick Douglass. And a reminder that just a year ago, Frederick Douglass was on the verge of being closed. So I hope tonight's presentation does go up on the website so that we are constantly reminded how much it has contributed to Walnut Hills, the neighborhood, but also the city of Cincinnati overall. Not just the building, the namesake, the people, the community. Because one of the things that we are trying to continue is an overall community learning center beyond just the school building itself, but within the community. Back in December, several community members and leaders were asked when the phase 2 was approved for us to be included into conversations to discuss how that was going to be rolled out. We're still asking questions regarding what is the transportation plan, what is the communication plan. I'm getting calls that some parents still aren't aware of what is happening. I would like to give them the best information. So not sure what's going on. Have not had any type of engagement other than we're being told. And I feel like there should be a holistic approach from multiple stakeholders to kind of devise the best plan that is needed. Again, what is the transportation plan and why are our Frederick Douglass students being asked to cross corridors? If these corridors were set up for improvements within the enrollment, but also to align with the neighborhoods, I'm not sure why our students are going 2 miles when the walking distance is 1.5, Evanston is 1.3. When it also advised to have community conversations across with South Avondale, Evanston, and Frederick Douglass, we have not seen that yet.
Thank you very much. President Sellers. The public is reminded that due to contract regulations, as President Sellers is able to go beyond the 2 minutes if indeed she chooses to do so.
Thank you so much. I'm here this evening, and I would like to invite all of you. There is going to be on March the 4th, there's going to be a National Day of Action to protect public education across the whole United States. Our national administration wants to slash the education and healthcare funding to pay for tax cuts for billionaires by gutting the U.S. Department of Education. On March 3rd and 4th, educators, students, parents, and community allies will take action to demand support for public schools and oppose these harmful cuts. I know we're here in Cincinnati, but this is going to be taking place across the entire country. It is not just with AFT, but it's also with NEA. So on March 3rd, we are going to come to the Board of Ed so we can publicly speak out against the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education and speak up, and people can sign up to speak at that time. Then on March the 4th, we're going to have clap-ins at CPS schools. We've already ordered really nice posters and signs, and people will be making their own. All CPS schools will be able to participate with that clap-in for their students, so we can show that we honor our students no matter what the government is saying about them. Tuesday, March 4th, that will happen at the start of school, and each school has a different start time. Then we will be having at 2 o'clock at the intersection of William Howard Taft and Collins Avenue. We are going to have a press conference, and that will take place at 2 o'clock, and it will be labor leaders from across this whole area. And we are going to call on Vice President Vance, since he lives here within our district, to prioritize Ohio's children over tax cuts for billionaires. The consequences of cutting and gutting federal education funding is there are 26 million vulnerable children in every single school district, rural, suburban, and urban, that will lose critical services designed to get them ahead and on grade level. There are 7.5 million students with disabilities, which is about 15% of students from across the country. They could be losing critical access to special ed services funded by the federal government. There are 10 million students from working class families who could lose need-based Pell Grants to go to college, and they could be losing their subsidized student loans, increasing college costs for working class families, which will then create an even more critical shortage of teachers. Many teachers, teaching is a pathway into the middle class for their families. There are many, many teachers who are first-gen college students who go into education, and they are our strongest teachers many times. There are 12 million students across all 50 states who could lose access to career and tech education programs designed to help them master the skills and knowledge required for employment in today's rapidly changing economy. So students, parents, and educators in our community are all going to stand together to show that we are on the side of our students here in CPS, and that's why we're marching for our kids on March the 4th. Now, I want to just give you a little bit of background, because there is the idea that, oh, they're going to send those federal dollars to the states, but if they are talking about distributing those funds to individual student vouchers to families, instead of it going to the district, those IDEA dollars could go to the family, which families in Ohio would receive only about $2,000 per eligible student to help them provide the extra supports that they need for their children's special needs. In Ohio, there are $551 million federal dollars that are in title-funded schools here in Ohio, $522 million federal dollars in the Child Nutrition Act for funding for schools, and $423 million in funds for children with disabilities. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but when they start talking about choice and vouchers, that is scary for those families, because they really won't be getting the professional services that those students currently receive through schools within the state of across the country. Not only are we under attack from the federal government, I hope that all of you are reading House Bill 96, and that is the K-12 summary within the budget bill. I know when we were talking about making sure we have a growth plan and making sure that we don't have underutilized schools, and there were people saying, well, it hasn't really happened, so we don't really know what's going to happen. It is in the budget bill, and it will require all school districts by November 30th, 2025, that's next school year, and annually thereafter to report to the state the following: any real property that has been used by districts for school operations, including academic instruction or administration, that's not been used to full capacity for 1 year, or any enrollment data and current enrollment for each school building that's being used for direct instruction, whose enrollment is less than 60% of either the building's maximum student enrollment or the building's largest student population in the last 10 years. When they say that these schools are underutilized. That is, they are including any school building that's being used for less than 60% capacity. And those schools can be taken over, and it eliminates the requirement to, it requires the district to offer any unused school facilities to high-performing charter schools, either inside the district or outside of the district. And it would go for not market value, but at a rate that is a fair value for educational purposes, which we don't know what that means. And that these, if there are more than one charter school who wants to buy, is interested in taking over one of our buildings, it goes to them, not to the highest bidder, but it would go to a lottery and one of the schools would get that. So by making the changes that we made and you made and everybody's been working so hard on, we've saved many, many buildings within this district because we had schools that were over-enrolled and under-enrolled, and now the enrollment is balancing out. But just so that you know, the state is adding over $1 billion of voucher money, again, for more expansion of vouchers. And if these dollars are federal dollars coming through, we know how they're going to be funding those vouchers. So I just want to say we all need to stand together to protect our schools. We need to make sure that we have the highest quality education for our students, and that means that we must all fight to have fair school funding for our students. So I hope everybody can participate with one of these actions next week. CFT will be passing a resolution to support all of this, and look at House Bill 96 if you really are interested in how the state is also attacking our schools and our students. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sellers. And that concludes the hearing of the public tonight.
Thank you. Superintendent Murphy and Treasurer Wagner, please present the following presentation.
Good evening. So Julie kind of preempted some of our slides, but we'll just repeat them so that they're like fresh in your mind. So thank you, Ms. Sellers, for your comments. Go ahead, next slide. So today we're going to talk about budget engagement plan and some results from a survey. We're going to talk about state budget bill. Mike's going to do that as he put those slides together. Talk a little bit more about Levy, and then some progress on the student-based budget model for the future. So go ahead, next slide. So Superintendent Murphy and I almost said Shauna, worked together to come up with some dates to have virtual engagement sessions. We came up with different days of the week and different times of the day so that we can try to encompass everybody's needs. It really started last week when you were in interviews. I was with the district-wide LSDMC doing a budget presentation, and so we're going to share the results of the engagement survey from that meeting. And then on Tuesday, we had a Just Ask Jen financial town hall scheduled, and so we're going to repurpose that topic to be budget. And so we'll continue to use kind of the survey to help bring in more feedback when it related to the fiscal year 26 budget. Just wanted to point out on March 13th, a Thursday, that's a morning session from 7:30 to 8:30, and so it's a little bit different. And so we just wanted to maybe capture people who before they go to work or school. Okay, next slide. So these are the survey results that were sent to us late this morning or this afternoon, and I'm going to pass the mic to my partner.
Awesome, thank you, Jen. So you will recall, you saw the categories during the last board meeting. And so, as Jen mentioned, the survey was shared with the district-wide LSDMC last Wednesday at a very high level. And then it was sent out for members to be able to respond Thursday. So since last Thursday, we've had 82 responses, at least as of about this afternoon. And then the categories that you saw participants were asked to rank them, a 1 being of least priority and a 5 being of highest priority. And so we'll go to the next slide to look at the first category. And this category is around public safety/service academy that we've been talking about not only at West High, but also at Withrow for the upcoming school year, and some other categories that fit in the public service academy realm. So you'll see on this slide, the blue bar indicates the least priority item by respondents, and the purple bar indicates their highest priority responses, and the other colors, gold, green, red, are those in between. And so what we would highlight on this first category, the highest priority for respondents comes around youth employment with the city and county, and of lowest priority is junior ROTC. Currently, we have junior ROTC at Aiken High School in the field of Army. And as we mentioned with the growth plan, we're looking to add additional junior ROTC, in particular Coast Guard. So just, we could say so much more about each of those categories, but just to keep it at a very high level. So on the next slide, category 2, property tax requests may not be very surprising. Of highest priority, the required needed existing facilities maintenance. Board Member Craig talks about all the time in partnership with Mr. Burkhart. And of lowest priority is a third Montessori high school. On the next slide, category 3, career and technical vocational, in parentheses, programming. Of highest priority, new health medical careers, and of lowest priority, expanded access to the Zoo Academy. Category 4, internal reorganization. Of highest priority, the Department of Transportation, although I will put a plug here, Mr. Burkhart, there have been great improvements, but still important to our people. Of lowest priority, I'm also extremely proud, Mr. Tony Fields and Company, the Department of Customer Service and Enrollment. And then category 5, yes, new and expanded programs. Oh, of highest priority, and I think everyone is in agreement here, is the RAP, expanding services for our children experiencing homelessness in Cincinnati Public Schools. Of lowest priority, Montessori expansion. And then I think the next slide is a summary of the overall categories, with the greatest, highest priority being given to career and technical education, and of lowest priority, property tax requests. On the next slide, you'll see those all join together, so you can look at it at one fell swoop. And then the next slide, I'll pass it back to, we're going to Mike, our new treasurer.
Thank you. So just to get an update on the governor's budget bill. Next slide, Rob. So quick reminder from this slide is just the timeline. So the governor submits his budget on February 1st, and it will go through the House and the State Senate and get signed on or right before July 1st. So we are in the February to April group on the left-hand side there. So like we said, in other spots, plenty of baseball left to play as we go. Next slide, Rob. So a bunch of urban treasurers got together on February 13th up in Columbus and had a kind of a retreat just for us to talk specifically about the problems, or there's not problems, but the challenges for urban school districts with the budget bill. And thank you, President Sellers. I think she pointed out some of these, but we're gonna go through them. So we have slides, I think, for most of these. The biggest one is the cost factors and getting that changed, and we'll show you why that makes such a big difference. Continuing to phase in the Fair School Funding Plan, not getting rid of the guarantee, and then there's a couple other issues that we'll go through. If you want to hit next slide, Rob. The biggest issue for us is the base cost factors. So the current budget bill keeps the cost that the formula uses at 2022 levels, fiscal year 2022 levels. However, it updates the other inputs for property tax values and for income. So you can't have a formula if you only adjust a couple of the items, right? And that's really driving a lot of the issues we see. So to give people an idea, we did a table here. So CPS costs are always ahead of what the state average cost is. Being in an urban area, it just costs more to do things. So we have some examples here, like if you look at the cost for a classroom teacher. State formula would fully fund that at $96,000 salary and benefits. Our average this year currently is $112,000, would go up slightly for next year. That's a $16,000 difference. Now, if you go to the next slide, Rob, you'll see how bad the funding formula is. Because remember, we're funded at 36% of our state share. So that means for that $96,000 teacher, the state says they're giving us $34,000. And when you do the math there, that means there's a $78,000 difference per FTE between what the state provides to us and what we have to make up. And that is all made up through our local property taxes. So that's about a $179 million gap for just one classification of employees. Next slide, please. So that's the biggest one, is we want the inputs to be updated to be fiscal year 25 cost, which would keep kind of everything in line. Another issue to talk about is a change in how we categorize economically disadvantaged students. So currently, CPS by the state average, we're at 87.5% economically disadvantaged. State average is 61.49%. So we get some extra money based on that because we're higher than the state average. They're looking to change things to a direct certification model. Our student dining services folks can tell you a lot more about that, but it could change things. We don't know how much, because we can tell what our district is, we don't know what the state's going to look like. So it's unknown what that impact is. But it might change what's called Disadvantaged People Impact Aid, which is part of our state foundation. It could go up, could go down, but it's a scary change.
Let me just interrupt for a second. So the way this works is that we are indexed to the average. So if the average changes, our index would change. Right now, we have a higher index because we're higher than the average. So it just depends on the direct certification data across the state. And we don't know that for a while.
Right. The other sneaky thing in the budget bill is with what's called Disadvantaged People Impact Aid, they're adding more requirements to it. So one of the things is at least 25% of that money now has to be spent on literacy. So they're giving us more restrictions of what we have to do and probably less money. Next slide. Then there's the guarantees. So the budgets have had, the funding forms have had guarantees for a while, starting in really 2020. For school districts that were losing enrollment. So the idea was if districts lost enrollment, the guarantees would fix that. This proposal rolls back some of those guarantees, and it actually rolls it back farther than just a loss of students. So this could be a $4.8 million loss just the next fiscal year for us. If you go to the next slide, Rob, Ernie Strasser, who I think some of you know, he does a lot of analysis of this data at the state level, did a comparison. You can see we would have to grow enrollment well past the 2019 enrollment to keep up with the changes in the guarantee. So it's not just about enrollment. It's about the overall changes to the formula. Next slide. So put it all together, current simulations, we would looking at losing about $10.7 million next year of state aid. And then an additional $5 million in the second half of the biennial budget. So you can see the numbers here. Their state share would drop actually to at the end of the biennial budget to 25.6%, which is a huge drop from where we've been. I mean, I think in one of the webinars I said, when the DeRolf legislation came out, I think the state share was in the 40% range. And now we're looking at being in the 25% range, so.
And the reason it seems so dramatic is because the wealth index is calculated based on a 3-year average of property valuation. So we have 2 low years and a real high year this year. Next year, we'll have 2 high years and a low year. And the third year, we'll have 3 high years. So we're going to become much wealthier over the next 3-year average.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, becoming much wealthier without getting any credit for the increased cost, for the inflationary cost. If you go to the next slide.
I'm gonna
go ahead.
Sorry. To solicit any questions that board members have, just so that you're not getting inundated with a bunch of questions. Board Member Craig?
So again, our soon-to-be future treasurer of the district here, Mr. Gustin, I appreciate you coming up, and I appreciate, Superintendent, you bringing the numbers with regards to the survey. I wanted to do one quick question to you on that, which I think is a little bit in line with where I was thinking of some of these things are. I think there's a little bit of a focus that somewhat came through some of the results as to resources that more directly hit to where our kids are now, as opposed to kind of where we see ourselves building towards. There's a little bit of the theme that I saw, and I don't know if you saw something similar in that?
I did. I saw something similar, and I also saw opportunities to educate people more and to share and talk about where we are and make things a little clearer in terms of where we're going and how those things will benefit our young people. Agree.
Okay, and my question for Mr. Gustin, and then also for current treasurer, Ms. Wagner. There's a lot that we're hearing about with regards to the funding plan, and I just wanted to make sure that we're very clear. Even when we're fully funded under the plan, under what their expectations are, and I think you showed it in one of the slides there, there's still, their cost for what we should be paying for our teacher, for how we're supposed to fund our classrooms, is still below what we actually do provide. So even if they were fully funding that amount, it would not cover the full costs of what our classroom costs are.
Absolutely.
And I mean, to me, that just is something that we have to acknowledge, that what they believe our students need and what they believe our students should have falls below what we even say what our students should have and what our students need. And so we're not even starting at the same spot of saying we're going to fully fund what our kids need. What we're really just asking the state to do is fully fund at least what they say our kids need in some level or fashion, right? Like that to me is part of the thing we have to also be thinking about as we go back to our voters and go back to our community, is that we have to acknowledge that the state is not looking at would not allow us to operate in the way and the manner, or our community would not allow us to operate in a way and a manner that the state says we should, right? Like if we pay teachers at that low rate that they would expect, we would not have teachers. If we operated without providing the services and resources, we wouldn't have the students in our district. And so I think that is important for us to be able to note as we go on and have more conversations.
Vice President Bolton.
Yes, thank you so much, Assistant Treasurer Still. Great team. Couple things. I want to follow up what Brandon mentioned, that our community would not tolerate us living at state minimums. It wouldn't. It's not even close. There's 600 and some school districts, public school districts in this state, and these state averages figure in all those 614 of them, and only 8 of them are even large enough to be called major urban districts. So we're not even part of this. We are in a separate orbit, even in the mind of the state legislatures. And I'm glad that we have that association and we're joining with our actual urban colleagues. But again, less money and more restrictions, less discretion. So it's a double whammy for us. Could we go back to, I guess, slide 20, which is the enrollment? Maybe, I'm hoping. Yes. Mike, you said something we'd have to do what to match 25 or what? I think can you explain this slide to me a little bit?
The idea behind the guarantee was districts were losing enrollment, and so the guarantee kind of gave you a floor. And so the talking point is the state would get rid of the guarantee, and it would be up to the districts to increase their enrollment. If you want the money, increase your enrollment. But based on how the numbers are at this time, we would have to increase our enrollment significantly above what we had in 2019. So this isn't just lost kids. This is a formula issue. So the slide you're looking at shows how much we would have to grow enrollment to make up for the loss of the guarantee.
And not to belabor this, but how many kids are we talking? I'll let you do the high math of subtraction or whatever.
2019's numbers.
That's 2019.
So you're looking at 218 for next year, but then 1,080 in the year after that, and then it goes up from there.
Okay, 1,080,
Yes,
in not next year, but in 27?
27. And remember, these are K-12 kids. You know,
Preschool does not count.
general ed preschool doesn't count. Preschool special ed does, but
Okay.
this would be your K-12 students, and we'd have to increase enrollment dramatically to make up for the guarantee.
Thank you. That makes more sense to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I just have a couple of comments. One is around the survey results. I think slide 10, Rob, is a little bit where I'll kind of land and then make my comments. The number of participants is low, but that particular slide, when it's talking about what that particular group of people felt the priorities were, it speaks droves in that Montessori expansion was a lower priority and the RAP is a high priority. And I bring that to the attention because that's the times that we're living in, and that we have a huge number of homeless students. We have a huge number of students that need services, families that need services, and that this particular group would say that the RAP, having a RAP, which is what we've not had before, is a high priority for them. I would encourage the team, administration, treasurer, to really significantly increase the number of survey participants. I think, again, I'm gonna always say this needs to go on the road, because I think that this is the type of engagement people need to really see. It's not the most interesting, and you get a little lost, it gets a little weighty, but it's super significant, and we need to capture their opinion about what they think their priorities are, and that's not only telling to us around setting goals for the district, but it's also telling around the time period that we're living in as well. The other slide, and I don't have the number, but you mentioned it around unconstitutional funding, and that this is a funding issue. And people always say they know that it's been deemed unconstitutional how Ohio funds their schools, and that is true. But you said something very poignant that I want to make sure we point out. When this was deemed unconstitutional, it was at 40-something% funded, and it is lower than that now. So I want you to expand on that, because this is not getting any better. Although we're talking about the funding formula, we're still in a worse predicament than we were when the Supreme Court deemed this unconstitutional. It is worse than it was. So this is, I mean, that's pretty, for people that know that this has been unconstitutional, it's significant because it's still unconstitutional and it's still lower. And then all of this other is super important. So those are just two things I really wanted to highlight. And you mentioned them, I can't remember when the other slide was, but I just think people need to understand that we are not able to really significantly provide. We're struggling with what we have, and what we have is getting thinner and thinner and thinner on purpose. And so I think this is great, but it's heavy, and it needs to be a little lighter so that people really understand the gravity of what we're working with. So just wanted to point those two out before you got too far.
Cool, thank you.
I don't know if you all want to expand on that, but I just think we should increase our survey numbers significantly.
We appreciate that. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Appreciate that feedback, because we did talk about those dates we shared earlier when Jen and I are working together to include the opportunity, to respond to that survey.
Do we have it on the website anywhere? QR code or something? You know, I'm big on the website. Can we just put it out there so that people can take this survey and maybe scan it so that they can get a link even during the board meeting? Like, put it on some page so that they can scan it, and we need to get their feedback. But most importantly, I also would like for you all to present a shortened, condensed version of this so that people get their highlights. So that's just it. Okay. Thank you.
So I just wanted to address what you were saying about the unconstitutional. It was ruled unconstitutional because there was an over-reliance on property values. And it's just gotten worse. So I remember when I first took over as a treasurer 10 years ago, we were at 48% state share. We're now at 36% state share and projected to go to 25 in 2 years. So You know, I applaud the fair funding team to produce a formula that's based on student needs. And that was a huge, heavy lift. The special ed study that was kicked off when they first went with this fair funding formula, they knew they needed to do some adjustments to special ed. And they spent 2 years, 3 years doing a study. They're not going to implement this study because it's going to cost $1 billion to fund it. That would have a significant help to us, because while our percent of students with disabilities has not really changed, the proportional percent of disabilities has changed within that group, and which is more costly to support. And it's been significant. And so those are the things that we want to go. And all the urbans, I mean, Cleveland and Columbus are very, very concerned about the state building sale, because they have a lot of really small buildings, a lot of empty buildings. And Dayton's got FMP buildings that they just built that they have to unload. And so I think that's going to hurt the other urbans bigger than it, because we'll adjust. But the base costing is going to hurt us dramatically. And the funding hurts big urban districts anyway, because it takes the number of kindergartners and divides by a number and says, this is how many teachers we're going to fund. Well, we have 43, 46 elementary schools, and they don't come in pretty little pockets like that, right? So we already have more teachers than they're going to fund, but our teachers cost more than they're going to fund. And so they're not recognizing the need of urban districts to pay higher salaries to attract people to it. And so like you said, it was ruled unconstitutional 4 times. I had to do it in my school law class. And they still haven't fixed it.
Can you also talk about when families choose vouchers and send their children to other schools, we have to pay for the transportation as a district, but we also pay for something regarding their if the student does have any disability services. And you just mentioned about how disability, the cost of that for students with disabilities has increased. Does that harm us having to pay for students that are not our students' services?
Well, there's some pass-through funding that supports that with auxiliary services, but we are required to serve students with IEPs, regardless of whether they go to school. Voucher students, the whole thing with the vouchers is that they get to pick and choose their students. And so what I hear anecdotally and with community schools is that when the students return back to us, they're further behind than when they left us. So then we have to spend extra resources to help catch them up before they get tested. And so it's I would love to see an analysis on that. Maybe in my retirement days, I have nothing to do. So yes, money does go to students with disabilities that are in our private and parochial schools. And there's some pass-through funding to help with that. Some of our Title I money goes with them. They have auxiliary funding from the state. I think it's about $8 million, but don't quote me on that. And then some of our title funds go to auxiliary services.
I just want to be really clear that we are also having to provide services for students that are not CPS students. It's not limited to transportation. It is also limited to auxiliary services as well.
That's correct.
And that's significant, and people don't quite realize that the voucher conversation is much bigger than simply, a portion of the money going.
You're going to have an eye-opening experience here. Go to the next slide.
Which is a good segue to the
That was a
next
good
slide.
segue. We did that on purpose. We did that.
Yes. So if you wonder, this is analysis by the Ohio Education Policy Institute of where the money's going. So you can see this is statewide. So you can see we're in the traditional districts. And you can see right below that is the line for vouchers. So I'll leave that out there. I'll leave that there without further commentary. It's pretty obvious where the money's going.
And this slide is on board docs, right? This presentation is on board docs. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Vice President Bolton.
Just as a comment to that, the money that you've demonstrated here on this chart, it's all basically the education money. It's not being taken from other places in the budget, the state budget. I mean, is this the line item for education?
This is the education group broadly.
Okay, so this is the line item for education, or are those things referring to education, K-12? So if it's not coming from someplace else, it's coming from the other folks that are in that line item.
So they've gone back to residual budgeting, so they're budgeting their everything, and then education gets
My
what's left
favorite new
over.
term.
Yes. And this is how they're distributing it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Think of a pool think of a pool of education funding, and then this is how it's distributed.
And that's how it's being distributed to the state's priority, not necessarily to our priority. And what you said about property taxes, where we've said this any number of times in this last year, that indeed the property tax issue is so great and so difficult, and the state legislators know it, that you will have school districts that will not be able to survive because of the cost of the property taxpayers are paying, but then when they can't, then that's state takeover. Because they will be broke. Because we've gone beyond what people can afford in many of these districts. Thank you.
All right, just the only other slides we had here, I think, is just, and President Sellers did a really good job talking about the sale of building stuff, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. I mean, I think, obviously, a couple questions one question she didn't bring up was what happens if these buildings have outstanding debt issues on them? It's like if your house, if you have an outstanding mortgage and you sell it, what happens to that? So that's a question that's not really covered in the law. And then the other obvious thing is why we wouldn't get fair market value, why they would designate the value to be the value for an educational institute, which, and especially in our city, fair market value for properties would be higher than probably educational market value. And then one last slide, Rob, some other things that we talked about that we may try to get some traction with, obviously revenue. Vice President Bolton talked about property taxes. There's some discussion of doing things like eliminating fixed sum levies. There's some discussion about, obviously, the 20 mil floor. We're not going to talk about that tonight, I think. Some of our fellow urbans would like to use other types of taxation to fund schools, like a bed tax or sales tax. Someone had a great idea of having the state use income tax credits to pay for property tax abatements. I thought that was a good one. And then on the cost control side, a couple of things is looking at a statewide health system pool, or health insurance pool, to try to reduce those costs. And then looking at what the charter schools aren't required to do and extending those to the public schools, which could reduce some burdens for us. And then finally, we've talked about transportation penalties, I think a couple times here, and how unfair those are. So changing that from a per day penalty to a per diem penalty. So the penalties would be only on the students affected, not on the entire district's day of transportation.
Well, is that it?
Well, we're moving on to a new topic, so that's
board members have
it for
any-
state button funding.
Any questions? No? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Michael. You might want to hang there because we need you. Okay, so moving on to levy planning. Just reminding the board, go ahead, Rob, thank you, of your deadlines. When you want to put something on the ballot, by the end of, or by July 14th, you have to have your first resolution done. The county auditor has 10 days to certify the language, and then by August 4th, you have to approve your second resolution. And then Dan and I get in a car and drive up to the Board of Elections and file. And it has to be filed by 4 p.m. on the 6th. So next slide. So this is just this running example of how we need to size whatever we need for new money. Or things in that, and some of these numbers have changed. This is just an example. if you go with the next slide. The facility repair plan, I have year 1, year 2, year 3, because it won't start until we actually get some funding for it, so I don't know what year it will start. And then the size of that millage. And then the third one is the longer-term bond levy-ish conversation. Go ahead with next slide. So we met with Brenda Weimer, who's our bond counsel, David Conley, who's our financial advisor, and Kent Cashel, who is an underwriter, and they do, David and Kent do a lot of levy work and borrowing work for districts across the state. And so we talked about what are the short-term strategies, what could be some longer-term strategies, how can we balance our revenue portfolio a little bit, diversify it a little bit. So the most urgent short-term thing is, what are we going to do with the $48 million levy that's coming up in November? Do you going to renew it as is? You can do a renewal with an increase. You could go 10 years, you go continuing. And so that depends on how we decide how much money we need to balance a budget moving forward for the next 5 years. Then you talk about the facility repair plan, and somewhere between now and when it gets approved, it'll be closer to $200 million because of increased costs. So we've talked in the past about doing a permanent improvement levy in 2026. What our team came up with as a strategy is you can do a smaller PI levy to kind of get it started, and then you have the ability to borrow against those future tax revenues to keep it going. They highly recommend making it a continuous levy because you're always going to have something to do with a roof or an HVAC or something. There's another alternative to all of these solutions is an income tax levy. So it alleviates the property tax grievance. And if you did like a traditional income tax levy at a 0.5% on the state income, would generate $64 million a year, and a 1% would generate $129 million per year. Now, if you only did an earned income tax levy, so only wages and not investments, or on fixed income people, it would not apply. So a 0.5% would be $47 million revenue stream, and a 1% would be close to $95 million revenue stream. So it's a different way of thinking of your revenue portfolio and how you could diversify. And then in conjunction with doing your permanent levy, making it small, your permanent improvement levy, making it smaller, you can take some of that money and put it into the bond levy and do that a little bit earlier. So just reminding everybody that right now 1 mil is $8.8 million. So next slide. Here's your little spaghetti or slinky, just to kind of remind you of what's coming up and what years you have available to do levies. 27 would be a bad year to put a property tax levy on the ballot because it is another reappraisal year. And so people are going to be upset about their property tax bills. Keep going. Any questions, discussion about levy moving forward?
Board Member Lindy.
Thanks. Just a process question. I'd like to know the date, it doesn't have to be tonight, but within the next couple of weeks, month maybe, would like to know the date of the board meeting when we're going to have to vote on what kind of levy to put on the ballot.
July 14th.
Well, that's the last possible one.
That's the last possible date, yeah.
I think hopefully we won't wait that long. And I just think that that's going to be really important, and I want us to have a downfield picture of when we're coming up on that meeting. So that's just a request, I think, for the board leadership. Is that a reasonable request?
Absolutely. In fact, we talked about that, I think, with your 100-day plan, Vice President Bolton, a couple meetings ago, so yes.
Is there a
absolutely.
date by which we'll know when that date is?
Well, the intention is to have a budget conversation every meeting for a while. And so we need to kind of follow the lead of the budget committee and what you all are recommending, but I don't have a date myself.
We don't need it tonight, that's okay. What I don't want to do is just kind of roll into it, and then all of a sudden it's a decision that's been made. I want us to know in advance when is the meeting when we're going to make that decision.
Understood.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Vice President
I
Bolton.
would add to that co-chair Craig introduced a levy design presentation at the last finance meeting, and I think, that's going to be part of the discussion. So I think out of finance, we'll be able to advise the board as to when would be the best several days together and what have you to live up to the request that Mr. Lindy is making.
Board Member Craig?
I want to thank you also for bringing us back to the table with regards to the levy conversation, because I think we started having it in budget and finance, and it was literally like right after you all had met with them, so it wasn't, like a full-on opportunity to be able to present it in front of us as well, because you were in the midst of making these slides. But I wanted to harp on something that you mentioned, or that actually Kevin mentioned in budget and finance, which is specifically that the 48 million today, it does not pay for the 48 million when we pass this levy does not pay for the same thing today as it did then. That today would be, I think you said 64 million.
64, the buying power is 64 million, right? To get.
Yeah. And so like the thing I want us to also be able to have a good message around, and like what we kind of taught through, my little idea was around having a message around each of these 3 specific levies, so that we have a continuous message that feeds how we're working with, touching every school, working all the programs, making sure everybody is cared for as part of this continuous effort. But I do think we need to be talking in sometimes in real people terms of the fact that if you got paid $48 to do a job 10 years ago, and you were still getting paid $48 to do that same job today, many of us would be like, I don't know about this job no more, right? We can look at things like the price of eggs right now, or the price of a lot of goods, where the things that we would buy, we understand that it's gone up in expenses. We understand why it's gone up in expenses. And I think sometimes when we talk about levies, where we forget that we sometimes just talk about it in like real people terms, right? Like, you know that everything's more expensive today than it was 2 years ago, so why would it be any different for education? Why would a seller of property, or why would a company that does repairs or does renovations to a building charge less tomorrow than they charged yesterday? And so I think that's also a part of the messaging that we have to make sure that we're getting into people's heads of everything we're doing. We're doing this not because we want to go out and get more from you. We're doing this because it is a necessity at some level to maintain the things that we're doing. And so I think that's going to be, it's really helpful to see that, but it was also helpful to hear Kevin talk about the buying power change.
So you just gave me a great idea, and one comment I wanted to make about that is what I'm noticing in a personal way is that insurance costs, homeowners insurance, car insurance, all that stuff is dramatically increasing. Our liability insurance went up $300,000-$400,000 over the last couple of years. Dan's not paying attention, so.
He really isn't. He's studying the history of CPS.
Yeah. Thumbs up. Okay, so yeah, and it's going to continue to go up. Our medical insurances are going to continue to go up. And so, I think people can relate to that, and I love that real people terms. And so we'll put something together for that. So thank you.
I have a question. I would like to know more information around an income tax levy, because that resonates more with me. I'm just one person, but it feels more equitable to people, that everybody's paying their fair share versus just property tax owners. But I also like to know what are some of the ramifications around that as well.
So it would just be residents, not like me. It wouldn't hit me because I'm not a resident of Cincinnati, right? But do you remember, Mike, how many districts are moving towards income taxes? We talked about it, but I can't remember off the top of my
I
head.
don't remember that number. I know there are a few in Hamilton County already. I looked at that.
People are starting to use this as a strategy, so yes.
Yeah. Honestly, the meeting we were at on Friday, like you could just see it. You could just see it in people's minds, because people are or property taxed out. And so I think you'll see more and more districts start to go that route.
Yeah, and that's fair. I also am interested in, and I asked you this question once before a while ago, like a sales tax levy, or is that a sales tax levy, where I know one district, I think it was local, put that on the ballot a year ago and it didn't go. But I'm wondering, I'd like information around that as well, because that feels more equitable to have a sales tax levy? And what is the process of that? Has the district ever done that before? And then what would the success rate be when we're having these conversations with external people to help us with the levy? That's one I'd like to also entertain as well.
Thank you.
Vice President Bolton?
Yeah, I think all of these are essential to know more about, and I think I was a union president in the school district in Hamilton County that was the first to use the income tax, and it absolutely makes a big difference. It's the most fiscally responsible thing to do. Regarding the monies that we have, it seems to me, though, that right now our issue is having to come to grips with the preschool, 48 million operations and what have you, and then trying to figure out a rather large issue in 26. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, and everybody said we're not ready yet. But then the other piece is we have a renewal between 26 and the 31.
28 and 28.
And that is in 28, and that's for 65 million
That's
renewal.
correct.
So the thing you've, I think, been emphasizing to us is that we have to, first of all, figure out how to get to 31, because that is remarkable when the FMP is paid off. Talk about mortgages and having a great celebration about that. But for an income tax, I don't know if it's possible, if we think in terms of this $48 million renewal, and then new money, or whether it be a PI or whatever it would be, I don't know that we could get the voting population ready for an income tax by 26. It might be something to be thinking about if we could even get to 31, which is the issue, as part of the FMP being paid off. In that you're looking at something very different, very new, after you've had a few successful ballot experiences in the next few years, and we're showing new buildings, or we're showing growth and our enrollment is coming back. It's just, it is to the effort that you're selling, it is a whole package, and it is over those 8 years at the most, that we have to come up with 4 different things to worry about.
Yep.
Thank you. Was that it of the presentation, or did you want to keep going?
Yeah, so there's a small group of us have been working on how do we do budgeting better to better serve the needs of our students and have the money follow the students. And so we started doing some, looking back at student-based budgeting. So next slide. So just to remind everybody, it's not the current year budget, this is for future, but it would take the student projections by grade and by condition and calculate revenue for a school. And so like by grade, they get a dollar value per base rate. And then we weighted, I think, kindergartners and ninth graders. And then by condition, so students with disabilities, gifted, ELL, career tech, and poverty would get an extra categorical weighting. So that generates, I'm going to make something up, so Wagner Elementary would get $14 million, and then the team would have to go and follow their staffing formulas because they're defined by the collective bargaining agreement or state or federal law. And then with whatever money else is generated, they can make some other additional decisions about how to support their students. Then we add the non-personal expenditures, and then they get the school budget. Next slide. So what we did is we started with what our state formula says our base cost is at 8101. There's math that goes behind that. So we started with that as a base. And then we started with some we went back to 2008 and started with the weightings of those grade levels. And then we tweaked them to what we know about where our needs are now. And then for the categoricals, we just took whatever was at the state formula in right now, because that was based on a study at some point. So next slide. So we modeled 4 elementary schools, looked at 2 neighborhood, 2 magnets. The model, we had to tweak the model a little bit, but the model worked for 3 out of the 4 schools. And so we have some work to do in that area. And we are currently working on, Michael Turner is working on helping me with the 4 high schools, because I don't know how to do high school staffing. And so we picked 4 schools that had different populations representing the corridors. And him and I are going to meet on Thursday to go over progress, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of those results. So next slide. Now here's the challenges that we have to figure out yet, because this happened. This is one of the reasons why we got out of student-based budgeting, was the student mobility. And the reason that's important is because in student-based budgeting, you typically take 3 enrollment counts, 3 times a year, the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year. And as those numbers change, you have to, your staff changes. So if you're a student that grows, or if you're a school that grows enrollment, we'll be adding staff, right? Adding revenue so you can hire another teacher. Well, if you're losing enrollment, we're not pulling teachers because it's too disruptive to instruction. So that school's revenue or their balance goes into a deficit, and they get into kind of like a district loan fund. And we were never able to figure out how to handle that mobility. Also, the restricted funding. So now in the state funding formula, career tech, gifted, English language learners, student wellness, and now we have some new restrictions on DPIA if the budget bill passes, to make sure that the schools are staying within those restricted compliance on spend. And then we still have to go, we kind of do a residual budgeting practice here where we always start with the schools, get the schools done, and then central office gets what's left over. And so as our revenues are shrinking, our pie is shrinking, if the schools are growing because of this formula, then it's going to squeeze out central office. And so we need to make sure that this is affordable and sustainable over the time period that we're going to use it. So we'll keep you updated on what we're finding and how we're tweaking and how it looks moving forward. We're trying to try it with a little bit of schools, and then we'll apply it to the whole district to see how that compares to how our school budgets are now. But this is definitely having the money follow the student and their need. We got to figure out how to layer on federal funds to that. Okay, next slide. So any questions about that? This is the end, I think. I don't think I have anything else. Oh yeah, that's just reference. So any questions on student-based budgeting? It's not what we're doing right now. It's a model that we used to do. We received a lot of accolades when we were doing it, but we just couldn't seem to overcome that mobility issue and what to do about it. And so now we're looking back and saying, well, we're a little bit smarter now. Let's figure out if we can do it better.
Board Member Craig.
So thank you for that part as well. And I think this is one of the questions that I would have with regard to mobility as well, because I do think there are certain factors that go into certain aspects of the high mobility within some of our schools, right? So the distance that students have to travel, the instability of housing, there's a number of factors that sometimes may go into a student moving. And I think some of that may also be a conversation as to how much do we want to accommodate a student's ability to stay within a building, as opposed to if letting some of those factors then dictate the student changing schools, right? So in a mid-year, the student's family is forced to move or forced to relocate to a different part of the city. Do we want to make a commitment to keeping that student in the stable school versus moving that child to another school, which may affect classroom numbers? And I think
Transportation.
Yeah, so like there's different costs to both, right?
Yep.
There's different things you have to weigh. So I think that's an important thing to think about. I wanted to also maybe ask in regards to the elementary schools that were tested, that you tested this on, was there anything within the one that it didn't seem to like quite work with that would be something that'd be telling for us as we think about this as a possibility to be considering in the future?
So the reason we had a challenge with it is because there were some programmatic expenses that went with the school that weren't part of base education, general education. And so we would have to make some, and I don't know how many of those schools that might apply to. When we expand our study, we'll certainly go look at that, but we'd have to figure out a way to deal with that.
And I think that's another part of the, some of the things that we're talking about doing as a district in the sometimes great programming that we have in schools. It is hard to sometimes think about how do you accommodate for a school that may have a particular like 4 or 5 programs that don't quite fit into a base cost model thought process because the state doesn't value those particular programs, or they don't value in the same way we might need to have them. I think the only other thing I would mention on this is I do think there's a considerable concern about making sure we have enrollment as close to correct as possible at the start of the year if you're doing student-based, because we do have a number of students who do not show up on those first days, or who show up the first day, disappear for a couple, and come back in, or whatever the case may be, because of how parents react to that. And so it's sometimes really hard to know what is your accurate enrollment date. That's kind of when you make your decisions on. And I think that's something we'll be talking about with other factors in the budget. But I know for the last couple of years, especially when we try to figure out buses to show up. And so you got some students who, we got bus passes ready for them, they're ready to go. They don't seem to make it into school for the first couple of days, or these type of things that make it very difficult to figure out whether or not that's the accurate enrollment. And so I think those are all factors that probably will affect how we think about student-based budgeting in that sense, because you could see a time where you might say one week you have 200 extra students somehow came out of nowhere, or like the case this year where you have an entire school building who says, we can't operate anymore. And then if they come in and say, can y'all take our kids? We gladly do, but that changes the entire formula for where those kids go.
Well, the beauty of student-based budgeting, this may tie into some factors that would be renegotiated, like class size, for example. Trying to lower class size, but the school can take the revenue and say, well, you know what, maybe we don't want to staff our K-3 classrooms this way. We want to do it this way because of these reasons. So it gives them a little bit more flexibility to serve the kids that they have. And so I'm hoping we can figure it out.
Vice President Bolton.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think one of the better things that's happened, and I know that Kareem, you've been part of it, I know Ben's been part of it, the idea of, and certainly Treasurer has been a part of it, the return on investment piece. And I think the front side of that return on investment is whether or not we are resourcing for results. Because you can figure it out at the end, did we get what we wanted, but really, did we really front load to make an impact? And I think the value and part of student-based budgeting is that you are resourcing to what you have, and whether that's finance, or whether that's personnel, or whether you decided these schools need this extra shot. It's not just an extra money, but it is targeted in particular areas. I wanted to see if you have any reaction to that.
I do, thank you. A return on investment doesn't mean just because it's a negative result that you're going to lop it off and quit doing it. It means you evaluate what's happening. Did you implement it with fidelity? Did you give it enough resources? Or is there something other factor that you thought was going to happen that doesn't apply anymore and you'd want to go in a different direction? So just because it's not a good return on investment doesn't necessarily mean you stop doing it. You just have to evaluate why, and then you make that decision.
And I think that goes to resourcing for results, where you can, have the deviation here or there as to where you needed to concentrate on. And so thank you and we did this in 2008. That's why you went back to 2008? 2008
was the oldest file I can find. Now, we started student-based budgeting in early 2000s.
Oh, yeah, but that was the last time.
That was the last file I could find in my records.
I believe that's correct. One thing on that then. It's not like we aren't funding particular schools with particular populations, is that we're doing it later in the budget process, after we've done the base. I don't want to give the impression that these additional dollars aren't getting to particular schools.
They're kind of add-ons based on, but it's more focused on staff than it is necessarily like numbers, like the needs of the students, so yes.
Thank you.
So I just have a question. I guess it's a comment/question. I'm kind of excited about student-based budgeting in that it is following in line with my tagline, reimagine education, because we cannot continue to do what we've been doing. So I think it sounds like a way to give a little bit more autonomy to a building and that administration and allow them under guidance, hopefully, to be able to make some of the best choices for their population to improve the student outcomes, which I'm really for. When you talked about the barriers in the past, I would invite, and what I go to is consider a corridor funding or a feeder school model. So what we were trying to do, what we didn't have in the past were the corridors. And so maybe it is building like a fundamental certain fixed amount for the building, but then if that school is a feeder for schools within their corridor, then there's a pot that they can tap into because typically students are transient within their corridor, typically speaking, unless, you're talking about rents and they're going from east side to west side. So if the pattern is, and again, I don't have this data, but if the pattern is that they are moving within their corridor, then perhaps funding could have a corridor component that allots for the schools that they move to still kind of have some funding because they're switching within that corridor. And I'm just giving this to you in a cursory review, but I'm thinking like if you're gonna go from like let's say a Dater High School to a West High, let's just say, I know that's crazy, or Euler. Euler gets a fixed amount, West High gets a fixed amount, but if they're moving within that corridor, there's a corridor amount that they
Like
get.
a shared pool of money?
Correct. So that's one of the things that I was thinking of. And then the other thing I was thinking of at the top of my head is there a magnet type funding model? So if a student is going to move, they may move within the same type of system. So maybe, again, I'm throwing this off the top of my head. So maybe they're going to go from Gamble to Clark because they moved across the city. So maybe there's a magnet pool amount of funding for those students that rather than have add-ons, they have some funding because they're staying within a certain type of system. So I'm just trying to think of ways to make that work, but within the new things that we have different, which are the corridors. I know we have a transient student population. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon, but we can look at the patterns of where those students, are they crossing corridors? Are they staying within their same corridor? We know some of that data because we look at it from a city standpoint, that they're moving from the east side to the west side for rents. But we can probably disaggregate the data a little bit more to find out if they're staying where they're moving to and why. So that's just one of the thoughts that I was thinking of around student-based budgeting. Any other questions from board members? I think I'm excited. I'm like, hey, team, let's do it. Again, I would invite you to engage the community and find out. I think some of the answers that we are seeking are within community councils, are within neighborhoods, are within the school buildings, and we don't have to recreate the wheel. We just have to ask people for the data that we're seeking. So I think we have everything. We have the ingredients. We just got to put it together. And I would invite you to do that. Is that it for your presentation?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Welcome. I gotta figure out where we were. All right. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our next presentation.
Absolutely. We have an update on our goals and guardrails, specifically guardrail 2 discipline and guardrail 3 communication from Assistant Superintendent Chambers.
Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Today I will be discussing guardrails 2 and 3. And just as a reminder, guardrail 2, the superintendent will not allow discriminatory or culturally insensitive disciplinary treatment that results in disproportionate punishment among students to go unaddressed. And if you look at guardrail 2A, it specifically looks at the percentage of Black K-12 Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students with a Category 2 offense compared to white students. And we will say that will decrease from 15.4% to 12.5%. And if we look at the data from fall to fall, from winter to winter, we see a 2% increase from winter 23 to winter 23-24 to winter 24-25. And even though there was that 2% increase, we are still on track to meet our goal target of 12.5%. Guardrail 2B. It discusses the percent of K-12 Black male students with a Category 2 infraction compared to white students. And this is specifically looking at Black males compared to white male students. And we're saying it will decrease from 20.4% in 23 to 13% in 25. And if we look at our winter 23-24 to winter 24-25, there was a decrease in 5 points by our African-American or Black male students, and there was a 1% decrease in our white male students. So we are definitely on track to meet our target for the African-American students. And just our key takeaways, we look at the quality gap, or the equity gap is we're continuing to close that gap within our students. And we are also looking at how our strategies that we targeted certain individual grade levels has had a positive impact on looking at our improvement to reach our targets. And some of our next steps, we're looking at our MTSS framework and making sure we align our strategies of support and early interventions for our students, and our SEL pilot, as well as our continued partnership with Children's Hospital. Guardrail 3, the superintendent will not allow district communication to be unresponsive or lacking in transparency, community sensitivity, or inconsistent with the expressed values of the district. And for this particular guardrail, we looked at we used our Qualtrics survey. And guardrail 3A, the percent of parents or caregivers who have a favorable response for the climate on the Qualtrics survey will increase from 62% in May of 23 to 66% in May of 25. And if we look at our response percentages and response rates from our parents and caregivers, we had 96% favorable response rate with our questions on the Qualtrics survey. And I used 50% as the benchmark for favorable and unfavorable. And if you look at the data for our families, we could have used a minimum of 60, and we still would have had 96% favorable rating. So and we had 4,061 families respond. So it's a pretty nice number of parents who responded to the survey. And for some of our takeaways, and we have opportunities for improvement, the one thing that stuck out was the question of my students feel safe going to and from school. We had 11% favorable rating, that particular question. So, I've already talked to Superintendent Murphy, and we're gonna, dig into that and find out some of the, actual reasons why from some of the families. And the other was I frequently volunteer. That was at 59%. It's over that favorable threshold, but we still found it would be something that we would be looking further into. And then a celebration, it was the question of how much your child's school values student diversity was at a 95%. And I thought that was really impressive for the families to look at our schools in that particular light. So moving on to guardrail 3B, the percent of staff who have favorable responses on the climate survey will increase from 50% to 54% by May of 25. I'd like to say we have eclipsed that. We had 100% favorable rating from our staff on the Qualtrics survey in the fall. And this was with 2,602 staff replying to the survey. Unlike last spring when we did the panorama, this survey only addressed the school staff. It did not surveyed the central office staff. So this rating is from school staff. And as you can see, we had the 100% favorable rating. And Robbie, next slide, please. And if we look at our opportunities for improvement, was the question, the students at my school demonstrate behaviors that allow teachers to teach. It was 59% favorable over that threshold, but still, we want to make sure we look into that because that number should be a lot higher. And the question, I've been concerned about my physical safety at school, is 64%. We want to, that number should be way lower as far as employees feeling concerned about their physical safety. And our celebration was a question. I get along with other staff members at my school. 96% favorable. I mean, it's a really high number for staff to get along, which is really great that our teachers are getting along in the building. And we will report on Guardrail 3C in the spring. That is to deal with our partners in the survey of our community partners.
Do board members have questions? Board Member Craig.
So thank you for bringing this information to us. I wanted to, don't want to take any, I'll take time to acknowledge that both our students and our staff recognize concerns of safety. I think this is I will never take a naughty moment to highlight the need that our city partners should be having in ensuring that all of our students arrive to school and are safe when they get there. We only can do so much as a district, and we rely on our community, our city partners, to do their part to that process as well. I did want to highlight, though, because I did get called out for it earlier, so I will continue to keep doing it. One of the things that was in the staff that I did notice is my building is well-maintained. And I think this, while we have still sizable people, it's one of the other, again, lower numbers of that. And I think that goes a little bit to, while many of our buildings are pretty well-maintained and pretty well-kept, they are older buildings that have little quirks to them, little needs to them. And especially for some of our buildings that we've been talking about for the last couple of years need some major repairs and renovations. This is even more of a reason for us to make this a priority for some of those folks, because I do imagine that would be the one thing I would have a worry about, is whether or not some of our buildings, if we do not take action, we start to see stuff like we can't use parts of our building, we can't do these things, and it isn't about the building. Like, everybody loves everybody in the building, and as many of the rooms you can get into in the building, it's great, but everybody know about that one room that you can't do X, Y, and Z in, right? And that was my experience when I was in school. Was also, we had, it'd be a student joke about, we can't go down that hallway because it's leaking in the hallway today, or things like that, that were like those things that you talked about, and comes up a lot of times in our surveys when we speak about those things. So I appreciate you bringing this information to us.
Board Member Lundy.
Thanks very much. I apologize to everybody because I have to leave a little bit early this evening, but I'm really glad I got to stay for this part of the meeting. I so appreciate the report. I'm glad we are continuing to do this and want to say thank you. I had a couple follow-up questions. I think I'd like to be able to spend some more time with this and comparing it to what we were doing with Panorama. I think two things can be true at once. I think I'm very sympathetic to the need to cut back on expenses and how expensive Panorama was. And there's some, and I've talked about this before, there's some things we could do with that are harder to do without it, largely benchmark us against other districts. And I just want to, I'll learn more, I think, by looking at those two things. So if maybe, I guess my request would be whatever the last batch of the Panorama presentations that we have, if somebody could send that to me, I'll look at it next to this one. I may have some other questions. Can you just, real quick, the only other two I had were when it says % favorable, can you just explain what that is?
We looked at the favorable responses, and I use 50% as a benchmark. So anything over 50% favorable, we looked at that as a favorable response is for that particular question.
Okay, so when it says that 100% of staff are favorable, that means that for every single question on there, at least 50% plus one.
Correct.
Said, is it yes, no? Is it?
It was, some of the questions or responses were somewhat or always. So it was, like a never, somewhat,
Yeah,
always.
okay. And
So if it was always or somewhat or always, we looked at it as a favorable response versus, sometimes not or never.
okay, that's great. I'm excited to dig more into this. I want to look at the response rates. And I'd also just welcome any ideas that it doesn't have to be tonight, but any ideas that the administration has about how it makes sense to do some benchmarking. Particularly if we can find some way of benchmarking outside of CPS. And just, again, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Board Member Crossett.
I remember, if you got a minute, Ben, I remember digging into this a little bit in the fall, and you can correct me, but I know that they were able to retain all these questions from Panorama so that the Qualtrics questions should mirror the questions we were using in Panorama. So that might be helpful as well.
That's a great idea. Vice President Bolton?
Yes, thank you for this. I would second what Brandon has said today about sharing with our city partners this one result in particular. And I guess I'm reading it right. My students feel safe going to and from school. So actually that means that 89% of them don't.
Exactly.
Okay. And the to and from, really, it's nice to measure that to some of this other stuff, which is highly favorable. And I think that what we need to do is besides the connected communities issue, which is hot and trot in the city, to add that even this result and share some of these results when we meet again with the cities, not just to show them this 11, but to also show them that we are constantly surveying our folks as how they feel about the schools, because I think that would be very helpful.
I agree. Board Member Crossett?
I like the idea that you use this 50% benchmark, but you might also want to have the average as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I
Thank
won't
you.
add anything else that everybody else already said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice President Bolton and Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our next presentation.
Thank you. And I think I only got on that because I submitted this, but this is news, and the superintendent's going to share what she has regarding the Bramble Regional Lab School, which is located at the Bramble Nature Center. And we have some new numbers that I think the superintendent's going to be sharing about a new member of the CPS family.
Thank you. So everyone is aware that the Xavier Montessori Lab School is closing. There is a constituent group who approached us a few months ago now about joining Cincinnati Public Schools. We had several conversations around this. We hosted a Q&A a couple of weeks ago, and then since then we've had 2 sessions for children to be able to enroll in Cincinnati Public Schools. So as of Friday, the number from the Montessori Lab School is 117 students. As of Friday, there are about 45 current Cincinnati Public School children who have expressed interest in joining that school for the upcoming school year. And these 45 students come from a variety of about 8 different schools across our district. So we're looking at those students also being able to enroll.
And it's my understanding that in addition to those enrollees for the lab school, there will be also maintaining some preschool classes as well that are not necessarily associated.
My apologies. Absolutely. So the current preschool classrooms that are there right now, that have been there, will remain as a part of the school campus.
Do we know then how we're progressing regarding the total enrollment as it measures against whatever was the FMP for Little Bramble at the time, or the last years, or can we kind of be tracking some of that? And also, to, I think, the point that was made, kind of to continue to track enrollment as we go through these changes, now kind of benchmarking it against those numbers that would trigger this building takeover, so to speak, or forced building sale. It seems as though all of our enrollment numbers now have to kind of match or parallel what those numbers would mean.
Yes, we will, I don't have those numbers with me right this moment, but we will definitely be monitoring, tracking those as we move forward.
Because as the person that was here for the FMP, as was the treasurer, those numbers of the FMP, some of them were quite high regarding the amount of enrollment that was anticipated. And the overall was low because they didn't think we would be, I guess, coming back or something.
They projected us to drop to 28,664 kids.
And of course, that did not happen. And I wonder how that plays building by building as we start to think about that. Will it be their projections, or will it be what we then went to Columbus and argued to have them upgrade the projections?
I think they projected the Montessori elementary schools to be at 600, 650. And they cut the second Montessori high school out of the plan. So we added that back with Gamble.
And that was like 10, we had to add 10 schools, I think, over time.
So thank you. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So a couple of things with regards to the lab school. And I know we talked about this when we were kind of thinking about exploring and bringing them in and doing the enrollment part of it. But I guess one question is to a certain extent, we had made agreements. I don't want to say agreements because it sounds like we actually like sat down and, but like essentially we made assertions that we would bring on staff. And the one thing I do worry about is that if we do not get enrollment all the way up to where it needs to be, like the promises or the commitments that we have we made any commitments that would result in us having more staff in a building than necessary for what the educational requirements are? I guess that's my one question worry. And then I think the other part for me is the transition of the whole point of it being a lab school is that we'd be able to train and educate, and the kind of speed at which that process or that part could play. Because I do think if we are thinking like a year or two, that's one thing. If we're thinking 3 to 5 years, it has a much different effect on the benefits that are gained from it.
So Deb Klein is helping us work on scheduling a date with the American Montessori Society people. I believe it's early March is a date that we're already looking at. So we're getting that scheduled and ready to go.
Board Member Crossett?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering about building utilization. It may not be a significant percentage, but it might be where we have classrooms that are required to have the teacher-parent or the student-teacher ratio like 6 to 1 or 8 to 1. I mean, it seems like those would factor in building utilization, but not necessarily the enrollment numbers. But I think somehow that maybe there's some accommodation could be made for that versus just the straight FMP member and the straight enrollment.
I agree. Several of our schools have asked about that and have raised that as a question. I don't know how the state looks at that. I don't know that they do at all. So we'll keep working on it.
Well, we could do it ourselves and be able to argue that point.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I definitely agree. How are the current, I have a question, a couple of questions. How are the current CPS families engaged about enrolling at Bramble?
So we've had a few already reach out, and like I mentioned, 45 already reach out about the customer care center. I believe just even hearing through the media, print and radio media, and television. I've seen it on a few outlets already. So they're asking, and we're having conversations with them through the customer care center.
So do we have a formalized process?
Yes, those 45 I mentioned, customer care is going to reach back out to them to see if they are interested in enrolling.
So I had sent in the 2 emails that I had received around that, but I guess my question is, are we, if a family is interested in moving, what is the process for them to do that? Are they just to say, hey, I'm gonna call customer care since our lottery system is closed? Like, what is the formalized process for
Yes,
them?
the same as we would any other way. So even though the lottery is closed, so to speak, we still have ongoing enrollment in our school district, so we'll utilize the same process. And being that we're going to centralized enrollment for next school year, I am funneling people to have the conversation through the customer care center.
Okay, great. And is it gonna be considered like a magnet, or I mean, what is this? I'm kind of interested in the cost. Like, transportation is an issue, enrollment is a concern for me, but then transportation, how are we dealing with that?
So our conversation with the lab school was that there would not be transportation, but it depends on what we end up with in terms of our current students and whether or not it's the pleasure of the board to provide the transportation. Going into this, we said we would not, but there are some other factors that are playing a part that we may want to take a look at. So once we have it solidified, who those students are, if that's of interest and importance, then we'll bring that information.
Okay, so, well, I'll send my questions. I still have more questions that are being asked of me, and that, if I'm, one parent is at Sands and she's like, hey, I want to go, what do? I said, well, I'm not exactly sure. I did suggest calling the customer care, but I have an email back from her. So I'm wanting to understand, if a parent has an interest, what is the expectation? Are they not going to get any transportation? Is that to be determined? And then from a board standpoint, what is the cost of that? Like, so I thought we were kind of in the information gathering stage.
Yes, I appreciate that. So right now, yes, call customer care as we would for any enrollment at this point. 2, there is no transportation established. However, if that is something that the board wants us to look at differently, we'll do that. Won't be able to tell you the cost of that until we know where the kids will be coming from.
Okay, do we know the capacity or the enrollment number for Bramble? Do we know?
No, I'll have to take a look at that.
You mean for the building?
Correct.
The capacity of Bramble building? Jeremy's looking.
Okay.
There's 15
Mr.
already
Burkhart.
ready to be occupied classrooms?
Jeremy, looking something up.
375.
Jen says the number is 375.
I remember Bramble being at 350 during the FMP measure, or, go ahead.
So there's 15 classrooms. If you say there's 20 in a classroom, then you're at 300. Obviously, if you have 25, you're closer to 350. Right now, there's 3 preschool classrooms in the building. The lab, Montessori lab, asked for 9 as they moved over, so that would be 3 additional classrooms that would be unoccupied. That's assuming 100% capacity that we're trying to fill all of those. So right now, we have a little bit of a juggling act on where everyone's going to go. Obviously, we don't want the building to be 100% at capacity, because that doesn't give us any wiggle room to utilize some additional spaces, art, music, those types of things.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
I'm sorry, Board Member Craig?
Two quick questions. One is for those folks who would have held spots within Xavier Montessori, are we having a method of them working with Xavier to address, like, folks whose kids haven't enrolled yet, like, who would have put in a deposit to have a spot in the school?
On the waiting list?
Yeah.
I think we absorbed 2 students who were on their waiting list so far.
Okay. And then the other thing, and I think this is just maybe something for us to talk about later with regard to, we have a number of schools where we're using pre-K within the building, and I know that that's another aspect of when we talk about building capacity. that a pre-K room is used very differently than a normal student classroom. And the only thing I'm thinking about also, though, is that in some of our schools, we have some of the larger numbers of pre-K. That does not mean that there's like 30 kids in one room. It means there are more rooms with kids in them in smaller sizes. And so that's just maybe another aspect of thinking about when we talk about enrollment and capacity, how much of that is true to what an FMP might look at because of how the building is used in some ways. But I think that's another thing for me within regards to the Bramble is because we did have not a huge number of students, but we had a fair amount of pre-K that were already there. And if we have any new that are being added in, that's just more, again, smaller space even than what would be in a normal Montessori classroom.
Agreed. Vice President Bolton.
Quick, we know that the state doesn't fund us for preschool unless it's disabilities or what have you. Does that mean that the enrollment we have in our preschools won't count toward the total regarding whether or not we have 60%? I mean, can preschool children count in one instance, like figuring out our 60% number, but not as part of our enrollment for which we get state funding?
Well, I don't know that that's stated. If you ask Shauna her opinion, it is utilizing our building. So I don't know how they're completely defining utilization.
Can we, I don't want to give them an idea in Columbus, God forbid, but I mean, just because it doesn't count towards the state funding that they send us, it's still that there are children in that building learning.
I think I was on that call today, and I thought it was saying used for academic purposes, but again, that's still ambiguous. But we
Well,
can
I
always.
think the little short people are getting a lot of good academic stuff.
They are my favorite people by far, trust and believe. But I think that it's ambiguous for a reason. So we can definitely find out that information for sure.
Just 'cause they haven't thought of that yet.
Well, don't give them any ideas.
I know, sip it.
Any other questions about that?
They may make allowance for a startup program, you know.
Well, I was asking about the capacity because I'm just thinking, what number do we need to get to? I think if we were to market it a little bit more aggressively
We'll get
with
there.
the plan, we would have no problem getting there. I don't think we have that marketing available at the moment. So I think we're just word of mouth, kind of people trickling in. But I think if we were intentional with that, we would probably be able to at least minimally fill that with 60%. So I'm not worried. I just don't think we have a formalized process. Board Member Craig, you wanted to say
I was just going to say, for this particular, the lab school wouldn't be a concern because we haven't operated it more than like the last 2 years. So, like, I think in some levels, this would not be as much of this issue. But we have other buildings where we have fundamentally operated primarily just pre-K in those facilities. And I think that'd be a legitimate question as if passed, if maybe that's something we talk to our legislative members in future conversations, to ensure we kind of understand what the meaning of it. And this is also, again, the vague capacity of, or the vagueness in some bills lends to problems that that have to be fixed through litigation and other manners at times, so.
Sure. And I'm concerned where they're coming from because I don't want that to make that building low. So that's the reason, hence the reason for my questions is like, there's a lot of moving parts that we are not able to control, but I wanted to get a bigger picture. Do board members have any other questions? Oh,
Not a
Vice
question,
President
but this
State.
has scared me now, that Mr. Craig has said, well, what about our Rising Star buildings?
Good question.
Yeah. So,
They're not funded by state.
right. And I mean, and I'm just saying, will they count that?
Those are good questions. We need to ask our legislators.
That's right. Yet.
That's why we have to market the heck out of our district. Just market, and we need to just pull. We've got excellent programming, and people just need to know what it is. We're shuffling pieces around. Let's bring more pieces to the table.
Right.
Vice President Bolton and Superintendent Murphy, please continue with your final presentation around projects and programming at Douglas and Evanston, future projects.
My understanding is this is about what we learned at the Green Umbrella meeting. And I know we're talking about Green Umbrella in a minute too, so we'll kind of put those two together, I guess. And that is that we did find out that the Reds Community Fund is, as some of you will recall, just recently they did the Bond Hill School and Recreation Center campus, if you will. Some years ago, some of you will recall when they did a magnificent job at Ethel Taylor, which is also adjacent to a rather large recreation center in Millvale area. Well, now they have announced, and we were there for that pre-announcement, if I recall, from Mr. Franks, and it is that they have decided to do a Reds Community Fund at great expense and great number of volunteer hours at our Douglas School. Douglas is getting a lot of play tonight, fortunately, and also at our Owens Learning Center with the Promise Center. That those are the areas where they're going to be concentrating on. And just want to thank the Reds Community Fund for doing that. And that'll be, there's more than, I guess, up to at least a half dozen schools of ours that the Reds Community Fund has committed these great dollars and volunteer hours. And the Green Umbrella Initiative, as many of you know, that's about an 8-year-old initiative that began with the members of the park board and some members of the school board being drawn together, forced to work together, briefly together anyway, regarding something that was initially called CPS Outside, which then began to be managed by Green Umbrella, as we also, and President Moffitt's been a part of this from her first year on the board, where we have the Green Schoolyard commitment in efforts, and we've had the board agree to spend some significant amounts of money in order to have outdoor teaching areas at our campuses, and we've accomplished maybe 20 or more of those out of our 60-some schools, and there's still a continuing list to find ways to establish and use our campuses as we try to be good stewards of our, I mean, we are one of the largest property owners in this area, and we have to be great stewards of our forests and our prairies and our kind of mowed lawns, and especially now. So the Green Umbrella Initiative is big, and I believe there's a national conference occurring here in just a month or so about that. And I think that the Cincinnati Green Umbrella effort and Outdoor Cincinnati is going to be among the presenters at that national conference. But we appreciate the administration's support moving forward. And it included the meeting that the three of us were at, the superintendent and the president. There were, I believe, 22 partners. And Mr. Crossett was there as well, who actually has the long-term commitment to the outdoors that we value. 22 partners at this one Green Umbrella meeting. And it's, I think it's one of our largest, if not our largest networks that we have. And we become very dependent upon those partnerships, as we cannot afford to do what our partnerships allow us to do and do for our kids. So very appreciative of Green Umbrella and the initiative, and thrilled with the Reds community efforts at both our Owens and Promise Center and Douglas. Thank you for letting us report.
Thank you. Do board members have questions? And I believe, President Bolton, you have the last update around the foundation.
The foundation, I hope that
The
others will
status.
chime in, especially Mr. Crossett and the superintendent and the treasurer. As the public will recall, we started to talk about a foundation under Superintendent Mitchell, and it continued to be a discussion. And indeed, it's a move now from a discussion through a couple of different superintendents to where there's been a working group that has come together. And we've had the advice of the administration some months ago that if we were pursuing the foundation, that the quickest and perhaps the most efficient way to do that is to begin to see the evolution of the activities beyond the classroom merge into a full foundation for CPS. And the administration reported on that about 6 months ago. And in that working group, we have been developing a MOU between the parties and as it would impact us. And we recently had a fact finding with ABC. And I think we're in the, beyond the 50% way on the map as to having something to bring to the board and to see if we can reach the finish line in a time that makes sense and in a foundation and a relationship with a foundation that makes sense for CPS. So I would hope that Mr. Crossett, who's been part of the work group, and the president who's joined, and the superintendent and the treasurer can express their interests and concerns or future direction.
Any questions, discussion? Board Member Craig?
Again, I think there's some value that can be added, certainly with regards to having a foundation for things that, as a district, we've been inherently paid for that would be benefited from paying for through a foundation and other means. I renew my concern, and I raised this when we talked about this before, and as I'm not part of the conversation, so I will raise it now again, that I think there are concerns that I have substantially with vendor services being provided by someone who is also serving in that capacity as to garnering resources and funds through the foundation. And I think there's a long-term plan that needs to be there to address this issue. And because I do think one of my concerns also is that there's an administrative cost to providing those services that we're paying, and then another administrative cost. And one of the things we've been trying to get out of is these duplicative costs that we pay for having multiple contracts with people. We've raised this specifically numerous times with regards to Hamilton County Services, and we've said this multiple times here, yet it's okay to do it for someone else. And so I think, for me, there's some serious concerns with what services are provided going forward, what the cost of those services provided are going forward. But also, I do think we need more of the full board's engagement into this process, because there hasn't been the full board's engagement into this process in a substantial way. And that has left some ideas and some thoughts sitting outside of the conversation. And so I just will, again, continue to express my feelings that I'm happy to have a organization that has been dedicating a lot of time to our students, still be a part of that process and still be able to help, and still be able to be a partner with regards to developing relationships to build resources into the district. But I think we still have to do it the right way. And again, I say that all the time, but the things still need to be done the right way, even if there's some great benefit to it. And I feel a little bit like we are getting a little cart in front of the horse if we don't do it the right way.
Board Member Crossett.
Yeah, Board Member Craig, I appreciate your comments, and I think those are concerns. We've had a working group trying to get something together that we could bring to the full board for a really good, robust discussion. And your concerns in terms of are we minimizing administrative costs? I think we're definitely being sensitive to that. Are we trying to do this in the best way possible? I think we are being sensitive to that too. I think in one specific topic that we've been addressing is, can a foundation be a fundraising arm and also a service provider? And everywhere we've looked at this is actually common and not a conflict of interest. So but I do think that there are some services that they are providing now would maybe be better than not providing. So we're looking at those options as well. But I think so there are some of those kinds of administrative details that have to work out. But I think the big picture on this is there's huge upside in terms of the fundraising. And I really appreciate what ABC has done to step up into this mode of becoming a big fundraising arm for the district. And it just has lots and lots of upside. And it also gives us an opportunity to give a little bit of reset on the programming, which I think is also an upside. So I'm excited about this opportunity. I think when we get our working group done, we might even have something to present at the next board meeting, I'm hopeful. And that we'll get something here in front of the board that, for the most part, will be received positively and give everybody a chance to robustly engage in the vetting of proposals or scenarios of proposals. So. But thank you for your comments, and I want you to know that we were sensitive to your concerns, and we think you'll see that we've addressed them, I hope, or most of them.
So I'm going to just offer, in the best interest of time, I share some sentiments that have already been shared. I am a huge fan of ABC, and I'm a huge fan of a foundation. I know that a foundation, in general, that's not ABC or any other XYZ, is a benefit to the district in what their mission is supposed to do to supplement programming, et cetera, to be the fundraising arm of the district. I am sharing concerns around the mixture of resource coordination and athletics with that, and trying to separate that from my love of ABC and all that they do for us, and a foundation and what can happen. And so I would invite the subgroup that's been meeting to come up with multiple proposals and not just one MOU that talks about, and I've shared this with them and I'm going to share this publicly, it needs to be, if you were to just be a foundation, no ties to athletics, no ties to resource coordination, what does that look like? What does that proposal look like? If you were to maintain one or two things, what does that look like? That makes me feel more comfortable, but it also puts some foresight into the fact that if you're, I'm not as concerned about the benefit to ABC and them maintaining and being whole, although I want them to be, but I'm trying to be fiscally responsible as a district. And so we had a great fact finding, but I do think that there may need to be a little bit more group think around direction than it has happened already. I think that the impression that I got is that the board wants a foundation. How we get to there, and I've told them I think we're going to get there, but how we get to there is what is causing a little bit of concern for me. And I'm also interested in having an outside agency look at this from our best interest, like the Office of the Auditor or whomever can look at this and tell me that what we're proposing is not a conflict of interest. In my mind, I'm using the word conflict of interest, and I think it's being thrown around like, oh, this happens all the time. I haven't seen those examples. I'm not saying that they don't exist. I just would feel very comfortable knowing that the way that we're going is approved by an external agency as well. Yeah.
We've been in this relationship with ABC for whatever it is, 20 plus years and they actually are a 501c3 foundation, and they've been raising money and providing services for us in this fashion for a long time. So.
Well, when my concern is when I spoke about this to former board members, much older and at this than myself, they shared exactly what you said, that this was formed as a foundation. There was money taken from different places to form the foundation of ABC, and they gave me a history lesson. And so, again, I see where we are now. I'm trying to be fiscally responsible, but I'm also wanting a little bit more information and just in fairness. And I think that I'm not the only person that wants that information. And how we got here is important, but we didn't just get here simply because of athletics, but it was a very big part of it. And so I want us to just just be transparent with it, that's all. So, did you have anything else to add, Vice President Bolden?
Yeah, I have a sinking feeling as to the history lesson that some board members might give. Were initially opposed to having ABC, which used to be the Student Activities Foundation. It's the same old on that one. But I think the interesting thing for us is to go back, and maybe I'll make this assignment. I'd like board staff and the administration to report back to us as to the number of times in the last 3 or 4 years that we have talked about a foundation publicly. And when the administration came back and advised us in this past year as to a direction to go or reassurance about conflict of interest, I think that would a timeline would help us all feel a little bit more comfortable about whether or not there's been enough transparency. But to the point about athletics and the reason all this got started with ABC is that the school district was not funding these programs. And the only way the children and the teenagers got to have these programs is that some great partners along the way came and started to pick up that effort. I think there's a marketing issue no, I take that back. It's not a marketing issue. I think where I feel like we need a really good board discussion, sans the administration advising us about certain things about a foundation, is what would we use the foundation for? What's the purpose? To me, I think that's the full board discussion too that needs to be used. What would the focus be? What would you want the foundation to be? Would you want them to be raising things from school activities 8 to 3? Or you want them to be about literacy? You want them to, I think that's the only part of this discussion, as far as I feel, that we've not had some board discussion and input from the administration. And I worry about if we're somehow going to exclude athletics or resource coordination or whatever and separate it over here from the foundation. That's going to put a tremendous burden on ABC, who has made its brand, if you will, athletics, and in the last 6 or 7 years, the arts, and now in the last several years, too, one of our #1 resource coordination people. So I think a good board discussion would be, well, how do we envision the use of this foundation, their purpose? We can make an MOU and try to do the structure and deal with some of the issues that we're concerned about. But really, the whole board, it wouldn't be a bad thing, is that, okay, you want to talk about a foundation, for what would we use that foundation? What would we ask them? What would we charge them to do? And what would be the label of it? What would be the banner of it? What would be its ability to brand itself? Because people have been writing checks about athletics and resource coordination and whatever. So I just think that would be a fun discussion too, among the board members.
I do agree with you. I want to respond just briefly.
Sure.
I think that is a very fair discussion. I almost feel like that's what the assignment to the administration was to come back with various types of foundation uses and what models could happen. I don't remember, maybe I remember an MOU discussion, but it wasn't around the specifics as much as it was around the purpose and kind of a skeletal outline of what it should look like. So I think that's definitely a place to start. I also want to share, I have absolutely no interest in dismantling ABC. I love ABC, and I think that they provide a wonderful service to us. I do have an assignment to the administration around resource coordination, the cost of that, and athletics, so that's definitely forthcoming. But I think that I will also say, I understand what a foundation is supposed to do, and I think ABC is perfectly poised to receive monies on behalf of the district that people do not have any interest in giving directly to the district. And I don't think that they're going to have any problem, and I've said this to them, and I've said this publicly. I think there's a large number of organizations that are interested in providing that. So I'm not confused on what that is supposed to be. I'm a little concerned with how we get there, and that's what I think needs more full board discussion. I'm for a foundation. I am for ABC being the foundation. If that's the case, how we get there is where my concern is. Board Member Craig, you had a question?
I was just going to say, I think for me, there is an aspect, though, that is about what the work is and the transparency of that work. Because there is a difference in being a foundation that provides support and being a vendor. And at the end of the day, a vendor does not have the same obligations to us in a way that a foundation would be working to draft and do stuff on behalf of, to sponsor and pay for stuff on behalf of. And I do think that it's really nice, and everyone talks about how you can clear these clear lines and delineate between this and this. That sounds lovely. We all think we can do it. And every law firm, whoever tells you they can work on both sides of a case, sounds great until they have to do it. And every accountant who can tell you I can work on both sides of the ledger here on this, it sounds great until they have to do it. And so I worry about the fact that we have not defined the work that would be done by the foundation and the needs of how we would meet the needs of the district through that. And there isn't clear possibility and an opportunity where you may have a person who says, I really want this for this team. They're really gonna love this, or their team's gonna go here, and we need to get some funds for that. And that's a really great conversation that would normally happen, where a foundation would come in and say, the team needs to go X, let's get it there. And there is great need to have that synced conversation. The problem becomes, does that employee have that same relationship with their employer that another employee might have? There's those things that happen through the normal course of work, that through the normal course of operations that we do not have control of, nor will we be able to dictate or determine. And that's why it's a concern to me. Because when you operate in these different spaces, you can do that. And we'd have that opportunity, but we haven't had the discussion even of what we want the foundation to do. So, I think there is a lot of, steps that need to happen with regards to what our expectations of the foundation. We have a number of smaller foundations with schools that realistically, we talk about them in foundation in name only, right? Like, they are not generating revenue on an everyday basis. They're not something that's generating a huge population of funds to pay for things. So there is a reason to have the conversation, and there are other funds that do generate a huge amount of resources for those schools. So I think there is a need to have that conversation. I just don't think that conversation happens in a vacuum, absent the role and responsibilities to ensure that those services that for which we are contracting with ABC are being done in the best manner possible. And it's not always about what can be done, but whether it should be done that way. And I have concerns with whether it should be done that way.
I think, I just want to add one point. In our working group, the ABC folks have been very clear that their objectives are our objectives. They're going to be very supportive of whatever strategic or immediate needs we want. They're not going to raise money for their own agenda. And I think they've been very clear, and that's a really positive component. And just to reiterate, I think, the scenario that you just brought up regarding employees and that sort of thing, I think you'll be pleased with what the working group will bring. So be a little patient, and we'll get there, hopefully, maybe even next week. So thank you.
Okay. So, a proposed consent agenda has been distributed. Treasurer Wagner, please maintain the list of any exceptions and the exception makers. Are there any exceptions? Do board members, the superintendent, or the treasurer have any exception items to the consent agenda?
No comment.
All right. So I need a motion and a second to approve the items of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Treasurer Wagner, roll call vote?
Yes.
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 Yes, except for the superintendent's report, page 2, section D. I am abstaining from that. We've already done the presentation by President Bolton, or Vice President Bolton. Board Member Weinberg is not here. Superintendent Murphy, she just wanted you to restate the cold weather policy statement that you had.
So we do not have a policy, but when making a decision about inclement weather, there are several factors that we take into consideration, including the temperature, including the wind chill, including the condition of our building, including our ability to clear our 67, 8, 9 parking lots, including what might be happening with our staff, including what might be happening with our children. And so it's really challenging to kind of put it in a box that people may like to have because there are so many factors and variants in making the decision.
Thank you. Are there any assignments or announcements from board members? Vice President Bolton?
I would like to assign, if I could, to the administration and to board staff, looking back regarding the kind of the timeline of discussion regarding the foundation as to, in public session, obviously, whether it's been in a committee or in board meetings. The other one I'd like to assign, if I could, is the sharing of the transportation costs per school with the board members. I know there's a newer list or a more recent list, and it remains the Rosetta Stone for me about our schools and how much they cost or don't. Thank you. Those are my two. Hopefully, they're not too horrible.
Any other board members? So I would like to ask the administration to research the cost of resource coordination to the district. What is that cost? I know during budget discussions last year, maybe the year before, the board was very clear that they did not want to dismantle resource coordination, but it doesn't have to look the way that it is. But I want to understand what the cost is. What are we paying each agency? What are personnel costs? And I know ABC has talked about that's a reimbursement cost for organizations, but that's really my question is what is the cost of that?
Can I answer it right now?
Sure, and in writing, but yes.
Yes, it's, I believe, 4.3 million.
Okay, I thought it was like 4 million. And we had received in the past a breakdown per agency, how many resource coordinators they had per agency, and then that particular cost. Yeah, it was a chart we got. I just like that updated. Additionally, I would like to know the cost of athletics, the athletic department for the district. What is that? One of the things that came out of our fact finding is if we're even talking about not having ABC do athletics, we need to understand what those costs are. So I would like to know the cost of athletics to the district for that entire department. And then if we could, I know that we do pay ABC. ABC hires our athletic directors. So do we have to get that from them as far as what the cost would be? I'm looking like if the budget is 3 million, how much of that is salaries? So if we can get that information from them. We were planning a joint city CPS meeting. The city had to adjust the meeting just for the public. We had planned a meeting, the city had to change that. The tentative date is April 16th. I wanted the administration to see if that date works. And I would like for board members to also see if that date works. Ms. Phyllis sent out an email requesting that that date be held. So asking board members to see.
So there is a CAL meeting scheduled that day, as well as district-wide LSTMC.
Okay, so that day may be conflicting. We just can't catch a break. And the last thing is the request for a joint Cincinnati Preschool Promise meeting with Cincinnati Public Schools. The email was sent out about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago to do that meeting with an hour before the CAL on March 12th, I think the date is. So they would come from 3 to 4, and then we would have our regular cow from 4 to 6. And I just want to make sure that the administration holds that.
Will you say the date one more time?
It's the March cow. I think it's the 12th.
The 12th.
Is it the 12th? 19th? Well,
March
okay,
12th,
it's
from
March
3 to
12th?
4, from 3 to 4, you said?
Yes. I just want to make sure that that date is okay for Rob and his team. In addition, April 16th might not work, but we'll figure that part out for the city. And that's all I have. Oh, and then the information around the sales tax levy, getting that information. Do we have that?
So our legal counsel sent me a message during the meeting to say that school districts at this time cannot do sales taxes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, man.
Gotcha. Board Member Craig?
I just wanted to actually give a kudos that I forgot to give earlier. It's of a non-work manner, but our current treasurer had her first recital. So wanted to give her a kudos as she is also now a accomplished musician in addition to her many other skills and talents.
As she gets out of here. Good job, good job.
It wasn't my first recital, but it was my first solo. Let's put it that way. So,
okay.
yeah, I played Amazing Grace, and it was fun.
All right. Well, congratulations for that. Do board members have any other topics, comments, questions, concerns? So the chair will gladly entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.